All right, everybody. We're doing a Colorfront Express Dailies demo class with Steve McMillan, who's like the head tech support guy for alt systems and Colorfront. Steve, you want to give us a little intro about what we're in for today and your experience?
Yeah, thanks for joining me. I'm Steve McMillan. I work for Alt Systems Cutting Edge. We've now had a merger with Cutting Edge out of San Francisco. And we're the US distributor for Colorfront software. We build the hardware systems for transcoders and we're first tier support for Colorfront. So we're behind the scenes with all of the emails, the support emails that are shared with the Colorfront engineers. So there's three of us here that are in the so-called Colorfront department at Alt Systems. It's myself, my associate Elliot Balsley, and Peter Fuller in New York City. And, you know, we may do other things, but we're primarily Colorfront centric. I'm going to give sort of my basic Express Dailies operational tutorial here. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Colorfront engine. Okay, so let me share. I've got a few slides. Okay, this is the salesy kind of slide here, and I'm going to read my notes here because I said it a little simpler. Colorfront Express Dailies is Colorfront's streamlined dailies application. It uses Colorfront's advanced color science and GPU accelerated render engine. It's designed to be simple to use and have as clean an interface as possible. So it doesn't load you up with a ton of buttons or options. It tries to utilize the entire screen for the image and keep the buttons and the controls to a minimum. And Express Dailies is most at home doing episodic TV and less demanding film projects. The more demanding film projects typically use Express Dailies' big brother onset dailies, which gives you a little bit more options on having 12 different deliverables or something like that. But Express Dailies is really streamlined to be able to deal with 2 or 3 cameras and just make things as simple as possible for you. And it has a pretty light footprint and runs on the Mac platform, where Onset Dailies is both Mac and PC, and probably the majority of it gets run on a PC system. So Express Dailies runs on the Mac. It includes color management, so both the proprietary Colorfront engine, which I'm going to demonstrate today, and we have ASUS 1.2 support. It does this neat trick where you can monitor in HDR on set and have your monitor set up for HDR, and you can switch back and forth between HDR and SDR without changing the monitor, which is cool. So your monitor is in PQ, and you can, with a switch of a button, make it look like it's Rec 709 and then switch back to PQ, which is great. When you're using the Colorfront engine, there's I call it a node because it would be a node in Onset Dailies, but there's a functions called the camera color node that give you precise exposure and color temperature controls, which are kind of unique. And so basically, because it's color managed, it's able to kind of invert into scene linear and perform color temperature and tint and exposure controls just as if it were in the camera, and then revert back into the working color space. Very, very cool. And we import CDLs and Colorfront CFE files, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you are using the AJAFS HDR in conjunction with Pomfret Live Grade, you can monitor in HDR from any camera log to HDR on set and save a CDL grade that includes the entire context of the grade, the input transforms and the output transforms. So, you know, it's a CDL. When you get a CDL, you don't know what LUT it was used with, or if it even used a LUT. And, you know, if this stuff has been written down, great, but, you know, somebody down the line might not have this information. Well, the CFE contains all the information to completely recreate the entire pipeline. So Express Dailies uses full 32-bit floating point GPU image processing. So, you know, within the app, you can't clip anything. It's super accurate. It's got extensive camera raw support, and Express Dailies keeps up really well with the latest SDKs from all the different camera manufacturers. It's a constant job to constantly be integrating the latest SDKs. it does automatic sound syncing. It automatically syncs via time code and has all kinds of functions for fixing broken time code sync. You can import camera original files and archive to LTO with checksums, and it'll make PDF manifests for all that. You can do 4 simultaneous renders at the same time, and it's super efficient. It reads a single frame and then writes to all 4 deliverables and then on to the next frame, so it doesn't have to go back and reread the source file 4 times. And if you've got several Express Dailies or you're in a post house with a whole fleet of them, you can have a centralized database and submit background renders and have them picked up on the various machines. And sometimes in the field, you'll have 2 machines, and you'll have one where you're actively doing audio sync and grading, and then the second one's busy doing the rendering the cam roll that you just finished working on. It does a fantastic job automatically populating the ALE. When I first started doing dailies, I didn't know what I was doing, and I was one of the very first beta testers for Express Dailies, and it absolutely saved my ass because it just took care of stuff that I didn't know how to do for me automatically. And and so it's effortless to get an ALE that contains all of the metadata from the camera, the CDLs, and everything you need properly formatted for a good conform later. And it includes PIX and DAC recipes. So there's there's tricks to making these sort of online deliverables, and so it's got these recipes built in. So if you're trying to do this in Resolve or whatever, and you don't have this recipe, there's a whole lot of hoops you have to jump through. In Express Dailies, it's just as simple as pressing a button. And then it makes pretty great QC and archive manifest PDF reports. And, all right, so that's kind of the end of the sales pitch there. All right, and moving on to the next slide. Okay, so this is that working? Yeah, all right. So this is the system requirements for, right now, we're still in the process of, fully certifying the new Mac Pro 7.1. That's what I'll be showing today. And, but undoubtedly will be in release before too long. And so currently what we're recommending is at least a 16-core proc with 48 gigabytes of RAM. And we want you to have one of the Duo Vega cards. So that's the highest level cards. And there's actually 64 gigabytes of VRAM on there. So it's just an incredible amount of VRAM on that card. And you'll probably be running a Kona 5 on a PCI slot for your I/O. And currently we fully support the trash can, the 6.1. And you should have a minimum of an 8-core proc with the D500 cards, but we would prefer that you were running a 12-core proc with the D700 cards. And performance is very good. And there you'll use a Thunderbolt I/O, either a I/O 4K Plus or an AJA T-Tap. It will work with Blackmagic I/O, but we strongly prefer AJA. We have a lot of integration with AJA and a lot of controls in the video preferences tab that are specific to AJA products. All right. So when you're setting up a dailies project in Express Dailies, it's important to get use a structured folder structure. Everything works, you've got about 6 choices on folder structures that you can use, and there's some ability to customize this, but right out of the gate, there are 3 that I think are important, and I rarely use anything but these 3. So it's important to kind of get this right from the get-go, because it's hard to change as you move on. But usually, if you're looking at the top folder there, Finder folder, the Varjujai, I'm probably not saying it correctly, but it's a Hungarian for something or other. And that's the name of the project. So that's the project folder, and everything leading up to that folder in the file system is the project base path. And within the Varjujai project folder, I can have multiple transfer dates. And so in this example, there's only one, but it's the folder that's 2017-11-19. And so that's a good way to label them. Sometimes I add like a day 0, day 1, day 2 after that. but that keeps them sort of alphabetized correctly. But basically, you have a different transfer date for every dailies processing date that you have. And in this simplest approach that you have here, within that folder, you have cam rolls. All your cam rolls just go directly in that folder. And then I have a folder, audio, lowercase. All my dual system sound goes in there. I can have a folder called looks, and I can put CDLs in there, and they can be individual CDLs, CCC lists, CDL lists, or CDL EDLs. And in the looks folder, I can also put I can put just loose stills. If I want to import like reference stills, they can go in there as well. And then in this example here, I have a CFE folder that contains the JSON XMLs that I would have gotten from the FSHDR Pomfret Live Grade setup that I'm using on set. And so that is the simplest approach. And it works quite well. And the system is perfectly capable of seeing different camera types and understanding that, hey, I've got two different camera types. They're going to need slightly different settings. And it does that just by interrogating the metadata. There are, however, times when that can sort of not work because you might have two camera types that are so similar as to appear to the system to have be the same camera type, but they may be different enough that you need to have separate templates for them. And a good example of this is if I'm using like a ARRI camera and some of it's anamorphic and some of it's spherical lenses, then I will want to have sort of an initial template for that footage that's set up with different framing charts for those. And so in order to kind of control that, the second folder there is showing that I'm using subfolders named after the camera type that I'm using. So I've got my Varjujai folder, I've got my transfer date folder, and within that folder I have subfolders ARRI anamorphic and ARRI spherical, and I just manually put in those folders whatever footage type it is. It's either spherical or anamorphic. And so the name of the folder defines the camera template within the system. So I need to be consistent from date to date with those folder names. So I should probably copy the folder names or have a template that I'm copying from and what have you. But this will allow me to define the camera format. The third folder that you see there specifically defines the camera angle. And normally the camera angle in a multi-camera shot is the first letter in the file name of the clip, A001. C001, it's camera A. But sometimes you have crash cams or something like that that may be naming all their clips, clip 1, 2, 3, 4, like that, and it's not meant to be camera C. So I can use these subfolders to sort of, you know, define a camera angle letter or, you know, fix one that's where it was recorded wrong or mislabeled or something like that. And so, again, the trick is that once you go down one of these routes, it's a little hard to change. So it's kind of worth kind of figuring out, maybe using one or the other, even if you don't think you need it right away. And at the very, very bottom of the text here, I have a custom path that can be entered into the database that basically allows for both camera format and camera angle to be used. And this preset isn't sort of available as a choice within EXD, but you can start in any one of these you know, folder structures and then kind of enter this into a field in the database settings table, and then from that point on, you know, you would do this right away, but from that point on you could do both. So if you want to kind of completely cover your base, that's kind of an advanced tip right there for setting that up. And and we get the slide to move one. Okay, so I wanted to, you know, when you run onset dailies, the processing pipeline is made up of nodes, and you have nodes for, you know, whether it's reframing or CDLs or this sort of thing, and it's all exposed as nodes. That same nodal processing pipeline is at work in Express dailies, but it's not exposed. It's hidden behind the scenes. So I wanted to kind of describe the processing layout for 3 of the color processing pipelines that you know are commonly used. And I'm going to show today the Colorfront engine. And Colorfront Engine is sort of Bill Feitner's take on ACES. Well, it's not ACES so much as a color managed system, but it has a lot of the same parts of ACES. It uses an IDT, it uses a tone mapping stage similar to the RRT, and it has an ODT that maps out to your display. And it has some definite advantages over ACES. And so one of the advantages is that the internal working color space is, for all intents and purposes, log C, or it can be optionally ACES CCT if you prefer. But by having sort of a more pedestrian internal color space, you're able to sort of, in the case of using it in the nodal sense in onset dailies, you're able to add and subtract nodes in ways that you can't in ACES, where you have sort of different color spaces within the color management. In ACES, you may have ACES CCT, you may have ACES linear AP0, you may have OSIS. There's these different stages, and so the nodes can't be moved or sort of deleted as easily in ACES as they can in the Colorfront engine. The tone mapping in the Colorfront engine, there is a master look that Bill has spent a lot of time developing, and so it's similar to the RRT, and it is the look, but there's a lot of different versions of it. There's bright versions, there's low contrast versions, and there are also some film emulation looks in there as well. And you can choose any one of those looks, but actually you can choose two of them and make a blend between any of those two. So it's got a lot more flexibility in the tone mapping. And then the ODT stage in the Colorfront engine will allow you to map out to different brightness levels and different display color spaces. And it's been a lot more successful at preserving the look across different display types than the ACES ODT is. The ACES ODT will give you one look when you're going out to Rex 709, and if you're sort of looking at it in P3 on a projector, it's not the same. And Bill's ODT, it's a lot more successful at that. So if we look at the node tree there for the Colorfront engine, we have optionally our rod to bear and a reframe. Then we have the IDT, and the IDT is completely and utterly ACES compatible. So into VFX, for instance, where you wouldn't necessarily have any tone mapping or anything, it's essentially an ACES pipeline, because you could, basically convert to, linear ACES to VFX. And all right, so we have an IDT, we have this great camera color node, which I'll show you how that works when we get into Express Dailies. But again, color, exposure, temperature, and tint controls in there. Grading is done on a CDL, and there's also a narrow band sector grade for addressing supersaturated colors or rotating them slightly. There is, I would say these tools don't get used too often, but there is a vignette tool that'll do either vignettes or sky grads, this kind of thing. And there's a skin tone tool for that sort of narrowly, allows you to adjust skin tones. We have a tone mapping that I mentioned, and then the ODT. And the ODT is a little bit more limited in Express Dailies, but it goes out to either Rec 709, it goes out to HDR10, basically Rec 2020 PQ 1000 nits, or it goes out to basically hybrid log gamma 1000 nits. So those are the three choices. And then after that, there's another node that allows you to do some soft sort of blurring or add film grain. And then there's the text that you put on the image, and then it's out to video output and deliverables. On ACES, you guys probably all completely understand ACES. There's the IDT that typically is going into ACES CCT. There's a CDL. Then it converts to ACES Linear AP0, and currently we're using the 1.2 version of the RRT. And then Express Dailies is currently limited to just a Rec 709 ODT. And then lastly, the bottom chart is a native pipeline, and this is probably the pipeline that gets used more than anything else. And so this isn't color managed, but you have an input LUT, followed by the CDL in the sector, and then an output LUT. So most people would put a K1S1 or something like that in the output LUT and do their CDL adjustments. And so, but that's the layout for all the different sort of, functions in the pipeline. We can import those CFEs, as I mentioned, if you're in the Colorfront engine, but in any of these modes, you can bring CDLs in and apply them manually. And then if you have a CDL EDL, you can apply the CDL values automatically to clips that match events in the EDL. The CDL values are in the comments of the EDL. So we have some productions that where you have a colorist that has never worked on any Colorfront app, and he's happy doing basic sort of primary grades, CDL compatible primary grades in Resolve, and then you can output a CDL EDL, and if that goes into the looks folder and you parse a camera, all those grades automatically get applied to the CDL. It makes it super easy. All right, so the next slide just shows a picture of the FS HDR, which is this Aja, basically SDI conversion box. And this is the Colorfront version of the Aja FS HDR. And so you would use this on set to go from camera log to HDR10 for monitoring on a HDR monitor, or basically it contains all of the controls for the entire Colorfront engine. And this can be applied, there's either a single quad link 4K throughput, or you can have 4 channels of the HD all simultaneously. And there's a browser interface that allows you to adjust all of the Colorfront features. But if you have the Colorfront film module for Pomfret LiveGrade, it works in conjunction with the FS HDR, and the LiveGrade can control the CDL grading and all of the input and output transforms in the FS HDR from LiveGrade. And then when you have a grade that you want to save, it saves the Colorfront engine JSON file. So it's a JSON XML, and you can see an example of it over on the far right of the screen. And then I included sort of the controls for the OSD CFE nodes. So it just shows you all of basically the features of the CFE that, so there's an input curve, there's tone mapping and the blend relationship between them. There's the camera color, the exposure, color temperature, and tint controls. There's a full CDL in there. There's some additional scene linear sort of trims for brightness and this sort of thing. And so all of this, basically, is included in this, easy to transport CFE file. And if you've got CFEs that are named the same as the clips, they can be imported automatically. So it's very, very cool. So the FS HDR is really the tool for being able to do HDR monitoring on set directly from camera log. So you can have an S-log, S-gamma cine output and then convert that with tone mapping to HDR, and then grade a CDL and export that and apply it in Colorfront onset dailies, transcoder, or express dailies. All right. And that is the end of the slides.
You want to open this up for Q&A real quick?
Yeah, sure.
If anybody has any questions at this point, even theoretical ones, feel free. If not, we'll continue on.
Yeah, the next step is just to demo Express Dailies directly. I was so clear, I get no questions, huh?
Good sign.
Could I have just one question? Ahead. So I've used previously Express Dailies, and I've used the, as you've described, I've used the Resolve round trip to Express Dailies using the CDL from Resolve.
Yeah.
That's only, I think I've used it in the native mode, because back then it's like a year and a half, I couldn't get my head around the Colorfront engine, and I just felt with Colorfront engine I don't have enough control. But is the CDL from Resolve going into the looks subfolder in your folder structure? Is that does it only work in the native mode?
No, to be honest, I only ever use it that way. Every time I show it, I'm usually showing it in native. I believe it applies in any of the color spaces, and it does both. it does what you said. It populates the look store, the red look store looks, and at the same time, if you're parsing the camera roll for the first time, then it evaluates the EDL, and if it finds matches, it adds the grades automatically at the parsing. So if I had a camera roll that I'd already parsed, and now, oops, I'm late to the party, and I add the EDL, CDL, I'd probably want to relaunch Express Dailies. And then, you know, if I hadn't already done a whole lot of work on metadata or whatever, I could unload that card and reload it, and it would parse all those grades. But if I had done some work where I had, you know, entered metadata and sunk audio, and I didn't want to blow that off, I could instead just open up that look store and manually drag them down to the clips. And then the next camera I would parse, you know, might automatically parse the clips. So if you lay out in Resolve, if you lay out your clips as sort of timelines that are based on camera rolls only, you know, like camera roll 1, camera roll 2, and then you sort them in SMPTE order, and then you would set your lume mix to 0. You don't want any luminance mixing, otherwise you're not CDL compatible with your lift gamma gain controls. Do your lift gamma gain, and then you can export a CDL, EDL, and that works like a champ. And so the CDLs are stored within the comments of the EDL, and they're done so in a way that Colorfront can read them.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. That makes sense.
All right.
John, your turn, buddy.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more about anamorphic, particularly when you're on projects that bounce back and forth between anamorphic and spherical. In that tree, it looked like you had to separate those out, but what if you have clips within a single roll that some of them are anamorphic and some are spherical?
Yeah, there you can save. It probably would. I'm going to answer it now, but if you want to look at it later when I'm actually showing the controls, you can. I would say that the system doesn't want to work that way, but there are a couple of workarounds for it. And so you would make a choice. Either I identify which clips are one way or the other and I separate them manually, or if you don't want to do that, and I can think of lots of reasons why you wouldn't, then you would have two different sort of framing presets. And I could, on the timeline, I could select all my anamorphic clips that need a D-squeeze, and I could say apply this, and then they all are set to that basically framing chart. And then I could have my spherical ones with a different setup for a framing chart and just select all those on the timeline and say, okay, apply this. And so it requires a little bit of manual intervention. It's hard to make it automatic if it's all in the same timeline. But if you can separate it into those two subfolders, then it becomes very automatic. So what you're essentially doing is, you know, if the system, you've been working with ARRI ProRes, and now all of a sudden, for the first time on day 3, I have a red camera, you know, and so the first time I parse the red camera, it's going to basically set up a new template for red that's default settings. And then as I, you know, change LUTs or the framing for that particular, you know, red clip, and I say save as default, then I'm updating this template. And so now the next red camera comes along, it uses that template as a starting point. And so that's essentially, when you're using those subfolders, you're allowing the name of the subfolder rather than the metadata name for the camera type. You're now allowing the name of the subfolder to define a new template within the list of templates that Express Dailies is using. So when I have an ARRI spherical and an ARRI anamorphic subfolder, I have two different templates, and they have their own unique framing chart settings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I must say I've used it exactly that same way because I don't find it practical. Sometimes, you know, in my world, you know, even though we try, we're often so short on camera cards that we need to keep for 2 days in quarantine, the other quarantine. That was So I find it impractical to, I can't reload every time. And it's fairly easy to change it, I believe. It's really few clicks, because if you're doing an anamorphic show, you usually have few super wide spherical shots. Doesn't happen that often, actually, and it's super easy to go into your even the whole day timeline, just select those clips and then apply a different preset that will either be fit all and this squeeze 2 times. That's super easy.
Yeah, it's not hard. It's just completely automatic if you use the subfolders. But no, it's not hard. Yeah, it's no big deal. All right. So let me show you Express Dailies. Let's get this other machine working here. All right. So everyone see my Mac screen? All right. So launching Express Dailies, it tells you the build number, which is important. This is a beta build, so there are a few issues here that we'll dance around. All right, so Express Dailies, when I first launch it, it remembers the last project that I'm in here. And I want to create a new project. I can go up to File and say New Project. But if I click on the project name here, I get a list of all of the projects that are currently in the database. And if I just double click on any one of those, I load that project. And it also changes the menu over here. And one of these items is Create New Project. So we'll just call this Demo 51. And it's asking me to point to the primary footage to get started. So I'm going to go to Varju High. I'm going to go to my first transfer date here. I've got a camera format subfolder here for Airy Spherical, misspelled. And I'm going to drill on down and point at primary footage. I can just point at the folder, but there's a potential that it will find a proxy or something like that, and I don't want that to happen. So as a best practice, I drill all the way down to primary footage. And so when I choose that, it automatically understands the format. So this is ProRes log C. It's 2K 16:9, 25 frames per second. And its initial color space is log C. And by clicking on this right here, I change the color processing pipeline for Express Dailies. So native is the input LUT, CDL output LUT. And then I've got several versions of Airy look files that get applied automatically. I have my ACES pipeline, and we're going to use the Colorfront engine. So I choose the Colorfront engine. I can also set up templates, which are basically collections of settings, and essentially, it'll remember the things that I've done to the templates in order to, in the course of making a project. So I can save templates, and I can use those templates when I'm creating new projects. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to start from scratch. And so the last thing I need to do on this page is click on this path down here. And this is the folder structure. And so there are several. So this is the one where I'm using subfolders for camera format. When it says camera only, that's the camera angle. I should probably say camera angle, but that's what that means, camera angle. And this is where transfer date and camera format are reversed. And this is the way Michael Cioni used to like to do it at Light Iron, because he would like to kind of collect a certain camera format in a subfolder and then have transfer dates. But you might have several transfer dates for the same day. And I don't like it, but he liked it. This is kind of meaningless. And this is where episode is used instead of transfer date. I would prefer to have episodes as part of my actual project name. And then this is the simple one. So if I know I'm just, I've got one type of footage or something, or I'm probably never going to have to deal with camera angles or spherical or any of these kinds of things, I would use this. But even if you're doing a red shoot or something, it's nothing but red cameras, I still might want to have different camera folders for different resolutions, because red footage can have different aspect ratios for those clips. So this is the one we're going to use. And then it's a matter of, this is the clip I pointed at when I made the project, and I want to make sure that the colors match, and they don't now. So if I click once, I advance the colors along. I can kind of just move this through this list here. And so this is correct. This is where the transfer date is orange, the camera format folder is magenta, and the lab role is yellow there. So that's set up correctly. And based on the project structure, this is telling me where it should find the dual system audio for the automatic sync. And again, it's important that it be spelled audio lowercase like that for it to work. If I capitalize the A, it doesn't find the folder. All right, so we're done. And I'm going to launch this project. And now it's creating a new entry in the database. And in this case, the database is shared locally on, it's on this machine, and it's we use XAMPP, which installs Apache in a MySQL database. And advanced users can get in there and make changes to the settings and this sort of thing. It's wide open. Yeah. All right, so clicking on that, if I click on this cards up here, I'm exposing all of the different transfer dates in the project. And we're going to start with the first one here. So I double click on that, and now I'm within that particular transfer date where I have 4 cam rolls here. Now I can double click on a cam roll and deal with them one at a time, or I can parse all 4 of them at once by clicking on load all new. And it's going to read all of the clips from all 4 of those cam rolls and put them into one timeline. If I hit the number 1 key on the numeric keypad, I expose a thumbnail for every clip, and I can right click and drag and move this along like this. And so if I want to resize this, if I grab in the corner, I can kind of left mouse drag and change the size like that. And we'll leave it somewhat large like that. Okay, so how do I get around? So when in this first thumbnail here, so this is the clip I'm on when it has this yellow border around it, I can left mouse drag, and you see this little playhead, which represents the relative position of the playhead within that clip. And I can just left mouse drag to shuttle back and forth. And this is one of the easiest ways to get around. And so spacebar plays, spacebar stops, and I think because I think I'm going to shift directions real quick, and I'm going to set a few settings in the settings before I go too far, because it actually affects what I was going to do next. So I'm going to set some favorite settings. So I'm going to go Command comma to call up my preference pane here. And these are all the preferences, and they're broken up into these different tabs here. So these are some kind of like settings I like to set when I'm first getting started in a project. So here is the frame rate. So we're correctly set to 25. And under project data names, this informs kind of a metadata entry window. I want to include cam roll on that particular screen, and I'll just click to enter that. And it's worth noting that we have this additional media paths here. And so if I've got my project structure on a drive somewhere, and maybe the drive gets filled up and I want to point to a second location, I can browse to a new sort of project base path, and it will be sort of evaluated along with the original project base path. So it's a way of kind of having a project in 2 places at once. All right. And so we're going to now switch over to the encode tab here. And there's a couple things I just want to point out here. This is the ALE format. It's going to be set up for 1080. That's what we'll do here. And the output tape name is currently file name. It can be VT roller, cam roll, or even custom. And the sound channels here for my ALE will be original. So if I'm doing a, basically a same as source render of audio that gets sunk, that's all going to be included in the ALE. And there's a couple things I want to set further on down here. So I want time code for web. If I make any kind of H.264, I want it to include a time code track. I'm going to show a quick kind of simulation of an LTO backup, and I want to archive audio in that. And because of the pack structure that I use for that, I want my MD5 level to be 3, which means 3 levels up from the source clips as they're stored in the LTO file structure. And I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here and point out that this is where I control sort of my target resolution for 2 of my 4 deliverables. So there's editor, master, web, and device. And editor and master are mainly where you're doing your ProRes and DNX HD. And so these can be, their default, it's an HD target, but they can be these different resolutions up to 4096 by 2160, which is a limit. That's the limit of the render size of Express Dailies. And if you have an unusual, aspect ratio, it can be original, provided it does not exceed 4096 by 2160. And that's where you set that, okay? I'm gonna move over to the audio tab, and I want my audio renders to be 24-bit. And I can do playback frame delays here if I'm looking at maybe a consumer TV or something like that. It has a lot of propagation delay. I can delay the audio so it's more in sync with playback, and it doesn't affect anything I'm doing as far as my renders are concerned. We're going to switch over to GUI. So if I hit escape now, I escape out to my load page where I can load new camera rolls. But if I hit another one, I quit the program, and I don't like that, so I turn that off. I'm going to, I want my quick metadata position to be above the timeline. I want to show audio sync, which adds a flag here in these thumbnails. And then I also want to show graded, which as soon as I grade something, will add another flag. Okay. I'm using a tangent element, and I'm going to set this trackball sensitivity to 20 and my encoder sensitivity to 10, which works well for me. Okay, we're using an element. The up-down arrows, I choose this because when I go between thumbnails, I want the down arrow to go to the next one, not the previous one, which is how it works in Media Composer. I'm a Media Composer editor, so I want it to feel the same. And I think that is it. All right, I probably forgot something, but I wanted to show. I might want this in small. Let's leave it for now. Let me show you a couple of other pages that are interesting. This is my video out page, and there's a lot of settings here that are, a lot of it's AJA specific. But this top group here, this is where I set the resolution of my video I/O for out the Kona 5 or the I/O 4K, whatever I'm using. So we're currently in UHD, or it can be HD. The camera page is, we've got some controls for adjusting sort of overall, like for instance, red to bare would be set here. I can set to full to bare, half or quarter, and whether I'm using IPP2 should be in primary. We're not looking at any red there, but I would be using IPP2. And then we'll talk about this later, but this is the paths where you decide where stuff gets rendered and how it gets named. And we'll get back to that when we get into rendering within the app. All right. So I've done that, and there's a couple of items that require that I changed, not too much, but a couple that want me to kind of jump out and back into the timeline. So escape takes me out to the load page. And you can see now that we've parsed these cam rolls, it tells you how many clips are in the cam roll, the running time for the cam roll, and sort of the processing pipeline for the cam roll. So a best practice is that a cam roll contains only one thing, but I know that that's not always the case. All right, so as I individually parse cam rolls, they all get added to an all takes timeline. And so I'm gonna double click that to get back in again. All right, so back to navigation, I can scrub. All right, one of the coolest ways, I mean, I have a long timeline here. One of the coolest ways to get around is middle mouse clicking. So on my mouse, I have a scroll wheel, and if I click that, I can position the mouse anywhere relative from one side of the screen to the other, and it represents the entire timeline. So if I middle mouse click in the middle, I jump to the middle of the timeline. Middle mouse click at the front, I jump to the front of the timeline, and obviously either side that I want. 1/4 in, whatever. So I'm automatically just jumping to something that's relative. Doesn't matter how many, I could have 500 clips and I can get around very easily this way. The system also has full J, K, and L. So, you know, L to play forward, J to play backwards, and then if If I triple click L, I'm moving fast forward. If I hold down K and tap L, I'm moving a frame forward. If I mash them together, I go about 8 frames forward. There we go. So full J, K, and L support for this. And then the left-right arrows are a frame at a time. All right. If I hit Shift U, I call up the metadata for the current clip I'm on, and I can scroll this metadata, and there's quite a bit of it. And of course, that depends on the clip, and sometimes there's audio depending on the clip that you're looking at. All right. So let's see, did I cover everything I wanted to cover there? Let me just glance at my notes really quick. Oh, resizing the viewer. So the viewer can be resized. This is kind of an odd thing, but I hold Control and I right mouse drag up to make it smaller, or right mouse drag down to make it larger, and it kind of pivots around the mouse, and it can easily pivot off the screen, but if I double right click, everything comes back again to full screen. So if I make it like smaller, which probably works pretty well for Zoom, I can right mouse drag to move this around wherever I want. So we'll just put it over there like that. And then I'll middle mouse click to get back to the top of the, now if I click on a thumbnail, I jump directly to that clip, and the little triangle there you see jumps to the middle of the clip. And if I use my up and down arrows, I'm jumping the playhead to the beginning of the clip. So I probably want to use my up and down arrows when I'm syncing audio and I'm looking for a close of slate near the beginning of the clip. I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger. All right. So that should be fine for navigation. Okay, let's look at audio sync. All right, so I've got all these green lines here. The system, every time I parse a cam roll, it basically checks in the audio for dual system audio and checks all the time codes. And if it finds a match, it automatically syncs the time code together. So I'm going to hit the E key to open up this metadata panel at the top. And this is showing me cam roll metadata from the video clip and scene and take metadata from the IXML in the dual system audio. All right, so these are, you know, typically polywave files, and they have, you know, they're done on sound devices or Diva or something, and they've got great IXML. Well, we read that whole thing into the database, and we populate scene and take metadata automatically from the IXML. And this time code that you see up here, this is the audio time code. If I go Shift E, I get this second strip down here that has the current video file name, and this is video time code. And so before I do any shifting at all, these two values should agree, audio time code and video time code, because that's what the system does. It just syncs them up via time code. And so if I go Shift W, I display a half rectified waveform. So what you're seeing is virtually the entire length of the video clip, the audio that's kind of living under the video clip for the entire length of the clip. And you're seeing kind of a blend of all of the tracks in a half rectified waveform. It's only going one direction, not plus or minus. And this makes it pretty easy to visualize the clap, in my experience. All right. And if I hit Shift W again, then I'm looking at 1 second worth of that audio. And you see it's pretty light, but there should be 2 yellow lines right in the middle of that audio display. And those are the goalposts for the current frame that I'm on. All right, so that's the audio that lies under the current frame that I'm on. So if I use my right arrow keys to basically find the close of slate. Okay, so there's the close of slate. That's my clap right there because this audio was done reasonably well. And it's not perfectly in sync. This is the kind of slop that Dailies operators are used to seeing. You know, the locket boxes drifted a little bit or something, and nothing's perfectly in sync. So there's a little bit of manual syncing going on. Now, the scene and take metadata at the top of the screen is coming from the audio, and the scene and take metadata that you see on the slate is obviously the video. So when I have scene 1, take 1 on both of those, I can be 99% sure I've got the right audio with the right video. So the job is to check the metadata, make sure it's correct, enter it if there's something wrong or you need to add an additional note like false start or intercut or something like that. Possibly set circle takes, and I can use the asterisk key on the numeric keypad to add this circle take flag that you see in the upper right corner of the thumbnail. All right. And then in the case where I don't have audio, I will probably want to manually enter scene and take, and we've got a nifty little tool for that. All right, so my audio is a little behind, so I want to get it, I want to slip it into sync, and I have sort of two things to do that with. If I hold down the shift key and hit the plus button, I slip the audio forward by a single frame. And if I hold down control and use plus and minus, I move it by quarter frames. So that's what the accuracy is in Express Dailies, is quarter frame. Now, due to our archaic sort of clap techniques that we use, and in an era of GPS, we should have a much better system. But we can only ever sort of know that it should be somewhere between these two goalposts. And so best practice is you either use the middle or towards the front. But in my opinion, there should always be a little bit of air between the clap and the leading goalpost there, because if it's touching that goalpost even just slightly and you scrub in your DNX render and Media Composer, it'll sound like you're a frame early. You'll hear the clap a frame early the way Avid works, even though there's, you know, it's actually right where you think it should be. You know, if you have a little bit of error there, then that doesn't happen. So I recommend, you know, so we'll do one more. I'll hit the down arrow to jump to the next clip. I can play it looking for the close of slate. There it is. And so if I park right on the close of slate, I can just kind of move this in like that. And then I'm checking that I'm scene one, take two, and that's all fine and dandy. So this is how it's supposed to work if everything goes fine. And it doesn't always go fine. So how do you fix it if it's wrong? So first and foremost, it's great if your project uses a smart slate. This project doesn't have it, and I don't have too many options to show you a project with a smart slate. But when you have a smart slate, the camera may have crashed. It might be way out of sync. It might be 10 hours out of sync, and there's no kind of time code sync at all. But if you've got a professional audio recordist and they're using a smart slate, chances are super high that the audio is in sync with the smart slate. So if I'm going to unsync my audio, so I'm going to come up to the audio menu and say unsync timeline audio, and it's just going to unsync everything. And when I do, by the way, I lose all my scene and take information. That's the way it works, so be aware of that. So let's go back to the top here. And so if I had a smart slate, and we're just going to use the clip timecode to pretend that the actual video timecode is at hour 0, and this number here represents what I might see on a smart slate. Basically, I just play until I find a frame where I can visibly see what's going on the smart slate. And I hit the colon key, and then I enter the number that I see. So on the smart slide, I see 10, 14, 30, 00, and I hit enter. And basically, it searches through the dual system audio, finds a clip that has that time code, and then syncs that frame number with the current frame I'm on. So now if I just move forward to where there's the close of slate, we should be reasonably close. And so same as if I'd just done a time code sync. So sometimes it's kind of tricky reading the smart slate, and you'll be between frames, and you'll have to kind of interpret what the number is, but it'll get you within 5 frames of correct, and then you can slip it in. And so that is the easiest way to fix problems. But say you don't have a smart slate, say you don't have good timecode sync, you're hoping for one of two things. You're hoping that the audio recordist properly entered scene and take into the recorder that basically, you know, is in the IXML for each of the polywave files, or they've at least done a decent verbal slate, and you can listen through your audio and kind of mark which clips are what for scene and take based on a verbal slate. I'm going to unsync my audio again. Okay, so in the case of the metadata is good, I'm going to go Option S, and it's going to call up this audio window. And this audio window lists all of the audio clips for this particular transfer date that I'm in. And so I know that in this case, I'm on scene 1, take 1, and I can see that this top clip here is scene 1, take 1. So I select it and I type Q. And when I do that, I associate the front of the audio clip with the front of the video clip. They're no longer in sync yet, and I have to fix that, but I've married the right audio with the right video, provided the metadata is correct. And then there's basically two approaches for fixing this. And I think I might need to put my headphones on to show approach number 1. But basically, I go back to the top of this clip, all right? So I'm at the top of the clip, and then I don't care what the video is doing, I'm just listening for the clap. So I'm gonna play. Okay, so I heard the clap and I stopped, all right? And so basically I just want to put this, using my left-right arrows, put this somewhere between the goalposts and then hit Control W and I mark the location of this clap. And so then I just jump back to the top of the clip and I go to the close of slate. All right, and we just find the frame when the slate closes. And then I hit W and it just shifts that audio there and then I can, you know, move it as needed. So that's technique number 1, and we'll just we'll unsync the audio again. Okay, technique number 2 is very similar to this, but I thought I'd show it anyway. So we'll associate this first clip. We've done that. And then I'm going to go Shift W, which turns off the waveform, and then Shift W again to show this wide view of the waveform. And I can play or not play, but I can tell that this item right here, this transient right here is the clap. And so if I just click as close to it as I possibly can, there's an automatic transient detection that basically puts that same marker at the beginning of that transient. So now if I go back to my waveform and I'm already on the close of slate, I hit W and I'm in sync already. So those are sort of the 3 techniques for fixing broken audio, and I think they're pretty elegant. And interestingly, onset dailies, which is similar to express dailies in so many ways, has completely different approaches for fixing broken audio that are also neat, but they're just different. And it's kind of odd, but that's the way it works. If I ever get a chance to show you onset dailies, which I would be happy to do, they have some really unique ways of syncing audio based on metadata that dates back to sort of film workflows where they didn't really have timecode sync, and it's pretty brilliant. All right, let me just check my notes to see if there's anything.
Hey, Steve, is it a good time to take one question?
Yeah, I can take a question.
Dane, go ahead.
Hi, Stephen. This is Dane Brem. Thanks for taking the time to show us Colorfront. It's been a while since I worked with Express Dailies, and I just wanted to ask, just because this has been occurring a lot lately, where we don't have a dual system, where we're recording to onboard camera systems. Have you, in your experience in Colorfront, been able to demux the audio and say that audio was shot at 2997, for example, that footage? Have you been able to demux and then retranscode to 2398 and then resync later?
Well, with audio, there is time code, and the time code has a rate, but there's no time code track per se. Everything's done with a sample rate and then a number, which is sample since midnight, for the beginning of the so-called calculation of time code. There is no time code, it is calculated. And so essentially, if you in a situation like that where you wanted to so-called fix the time code, if you did your sync based on claps like we're doing now in Express Dailies, you could output audio that's sort of trimmed and sunk, and this would reflect the proper frame rate. But there are some tools that if I were doing this, I might want to kind of sort that out. And Wave Agent allows me to basically kind of like not only, you know, say, okay, you're no longer 2997, but now calculate as 2398. And then I think there are some calculators out there that basically, if you know that the start time is at a particular clock time at 2997, what should the sample since midnight be if I want the same clock time, but I'm kind of interpreting it as 2398? And you can change all that stuff in metadata on copies of the original files prior to doing any of this. And so I would have to make the determination whether I wanted to get the benefit of an automatic sync, but do that stuff ahead of time, and then end up with maybe source quality audio files that had this now corrected metadata. And a dirty little secret about this project is the audio was completely fucked up. And on this first day, I went into Wave Agent and I just kind of fixed it so it looked like it was actually syncing correctly and wasn't like 5 hours off. So that kind of work is possible to do in Wave Agent. Here we have 65 clips, and I'll tell you that doing that in Wave Agent took me about 4 hours. You know, it is sort of time consuming. When you do audio syncing, however you do it, like you could have manually done that through the metadata, which would probably be correct. And so I think I could sync these 4 camera manually faster than I could fix them in Wave Agent. And then once I've sunk all the audio, I can render out new broadcast wave files. And how are they different? Well, they're trimmed. The renders are the length of the video clip, and they represent any kind of syncing, so that you know, when I line up the new audio with the original video, they're going to be perfectly in sync. And so why is this good? Well, there used to be a limitation with the Avid Media Toolkit that you couldn't basically import or render out more than 16 tracks. And that limitation has recently disappeared, and it's no longer an issue. But it used to be that if I had a project, and this wasn't just Colorfront, this was anybody that used the official SDK for rendering DNX. If I had 20 tracks and I wanted to import 20 tracks into Media Composer, I would render the 16 that I could with the DNX, and then I would output WAV files. And because they were trimmed and synced, it was very, very easy to just say, okay, link up with this new audio in Media Composer, and I don't even have to worry about it. I know it's in sync. You know, all I have to do is just say, you know, hey, stuff with the right time code, sync up, and then I've got my 20 tracks and everything. So if there's some reason, and I think there is a little bit more audio metadata that's captured in Media Composer if you're actually dealing with WAV files rather than MXF audio. You know, there might be a number of reasons why you want to do that. So Express Dailies has the ability to sort of rewrite this audio. And when we're talking about PCM audio, making a copy of it is literally just a copy. I mean, the PCM data there's no compression, there's no recompression, anything like that. It's just, it comes out the same on the other side. There's no quality loss or anything. But you'll definitely get a different set of metadata that way. I think last I checked, I believe the IXML is preserved in these new files, but it may no longer be valid for every field. You know, I mean, you've reimagined the audio. There might be some lingering metadata in there that still thinks it's 2997, blah, 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 blah. But really, when it comes to audio, the only thing that really matters is the sample rate. And so you've got to pay more attention to pull-ups and pull-downs and sample rate. And then this, you know, this big number, this sample since midnight, sort of defines the start of the clip. And then the frame rate metadata calculates what that number means. You know, I mean, if it's a million, something like that, and you're 2997, it's going to be one SMPTE number, and that same number interpreted as 2398 is going to be a different SMPTE number. And so, you know, if you're switching from one frame rate to another, and you want to basically end up at the same clock value, you're going to have to change that sample since midnight number. And you can do that in Wave Agent. Does that answer the question?
That does answer the question very much. Yeah, we ran into an issue recently where we had we're doing remote production and unfortunately miscommunications between frame rate. We had footage between 2997, 25, 5994, and some true 24. So, you know, that was a huge recovery, but in the end we ended up, and we were also using the latest Avid too. So there's some new fun stuff, buggy stuff in the newest one, but we had to end up throwing some of it away just because we couldn't quite figure it out. There's Wave Agent, that's good to know. That's a good workaround. I do use Wave Agent a lot, so that's great. I didn't realize it did that.
There's another sort of audio workflow that can sometimes get you out of hot water, and it has nothing to do with Colorfront, but there is this software called Pluralize. Maybe you've heard of it.
Ah, yeah. I've been using Pluralize for a while.
Yeah, it does waveform.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, if you've got time code issues or whatever, and you've got audio that's embedded in your video clip, you can get a sync that way when all else fails, you know. And I think Premiere hosts that pretty well.
Nice. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. That does actually give some answers to stuff. I'm going to go see what I can do now.
Okay, so there's one more thing to talk about with audio, and that's mixdowns, but we'll save that for when we talk about renders. So let's kind of get into the image processing now. I'm going to full screen this. And we'll clean up our act here. So I'll get rid of this and that and that. All right. So I'm going to type H here, and this opens up what we call the HUD, or heads up display. And this is like 90% of all the controls for doing any image processing and setting up your renders and this sort of thing. And there's these different tabs here. So I have an input tab. I have my color grading here. There is some very limited VFX, vignettes, gradients, that sort of thing. This is where I set my framing and letterboxing, this sort of thing. This is my burn-ins, text. And then my output is both my renders, and it's also, these are basically there's 2 channels of ODT settings here. And if I click on this again, this is my, my tone mapping for the Colorfront engine, all right? So I think I want to talk about the Colorfront engine. I'm going to read this a little bit because it'll say what I want to say. Okay, so the Colorfront engine is Colorfront's color managed system, similar in concept to ACES, that includes Bill Feitner's HDR remapping. And that's based on his human perceptual model, where as you make something brighter, you know, if you went from SDR to HDR or log to HDR, there has to be sort of a desat that happens, because as everything gets brighter, colors must be desaturated to present the same creative intent. And this is super important, and this is perhaps more art than science. And the Colorfront engine is all about this, and that's why it's so cool, and we've won tech awards for it. So, you know, its use in Express Dailies is one thing, but it actually goes far beyond that. And you know, it's a more complicated and granular thing in transcoder and OSD, but Express Dailies uses it well within the context of dailies. And so camera input transforms. The IDTs are ACES compatible. The common grading space is either ACES CCT or essentially log C. We call it CF color, CF log, but it's log C with an ASA of 800. And there are the multiple tone maps. You know, instead of the single RRT, you've got different looks, and any 2 can be blended. And the ODT within Express Dailies can output to either Rec 709, HDR10, which is 1000 nit PQ Rec 2020, or hybrid log gamma, probably not used too much. And it's possible to accurately simulate 100 nit Rec 709 on an HDR monitor setup for PQ. Okay, so on the input page here, since we're in the Colorfront engine, I have basically, this is telling me how my IDT is set up for this footage. And this is all, again, ARRI ProRes stuff. So it's in log C. So it's telling me that my gamma curve is set up for log C and the input color space is ARRI wide gamut. And then these are the controls here for this Colorfront engine. Basically, it's the color node. And so the system has already taken this footage, which already is log C, but this could have been in red IPP2 log 3 G10, and turned it into CF log CF color. And then it enters the process for the color, and then so because it already knows what its input color space is, log C, it can convert this to scene linear. And because it's in scene linear, I can do a one-stop exposure adjustment, and it's just as if I had done a single aperture change on the lens. And you know, but I can go 1.5 if I like, and so I can set this up the way I want it, and I can make it cooler or warmer. And so I could definitely fix color temperature problems if the camera were set white balanced wrong or something like that. I can do that. Control, click on this to reset it to 0. And then I also have, you know, green or a magenta tint as well. And so now that I've made this exposure adjustment, I can select individual clips on the timeline and save that to selected. If I say to all, it will overwrite the exposure setting for every clip on the timeline. Or if I click to default, that not only does it change everything on the timeline, but it updates the camera template for our you know, ARRI spherical. And so you'll see this button several places within the HUD, and that's how you update the template. So it updates the current timeline you're on and any future timelines, but not previous timelines. So if on day 2, I decided to update my template so that everything has an exposure adjustment of 1.5 stops, everything on the current timeline would get 1.5 stops. The next ARRI spherical camera that I parse would also, because it's part of the template, get 1.5 stops. But if I went back to yesterday to work on clips and they were created before I made this change, they would not have the 1.5 stops. So it's not going to change anything that you did in the past. It's only going to work from current onwards. All right, important to understand. All right, so I'm not going to make any change to this, but you could very easily change everything and make it part of the template. All right, so for the Colorfront engine, if we jump over to the output here and I hit this, these are the lists of different looks that I can have. So right by default, I'm in the master look, which in my humble opinion is similar to the RRT, the ASUS RT, but I think it looks even better on skin tones, but it's a very neutral sort of grading start. And so one of the brilliant things about you know, a color managed system is, you know, automatically for different camera types, they automatically wake up sort of already looking very nice and tone mapped. And particularly with the Colorfront engine, it's extremely successful at doing this. And so any grading that you have to do is you're not taking something that's in camera log and forcing it to look right on a Rec 709 screen. It automatically looks right, and then you can decide if the camera look was a little too warm or needs to be a little brighter or needs a particular creative intent, but you're not having to push the controls very hard at all. And in doing so, not only are you not working hard and it already looked good to begin with, but you can be a lot more consistent across the board. When you need to make small little changes to make stuff brighter rather than pushing the hell out of the CDL controls, you tend to get much more consistent results, and you haven't twisted the image into ways that makes it hard to match from scene to scene. All right, but you can see that there's master looks and there's cool and low cost and soft and vivid versions of it. So there's various variations on this. And then there's, you know, film emulations, Fuji, Kodachrome, Ethichrome, this sort of thing, Agfa. And there's even a faithful representation of the ARRI K1S1 look in here. And so I can set up, you know, 2 different looks here, and I can kind of blend between them, and it's subtle, but as you know, DPs will pay a lot of attention to this. So you can set up kind of a master project look in here, and that's your tone mapping for all different camera types. So the IDT takes care of getting the red and the Arri and the Sony footage and everything all into a single common color space, log C, which, as we all know, log C is super easy to grade in. CDLs operate really nicely in log C. And because we're in this common color space, we're able to use the camera color node because we already know what's coming into it. We're able to invert back into a linear mode. And when you do color correction in linear, you don't have the problem of compounding saturation like you do in any kind of log or you know, display mapped color space. So linear works great for doing exposure and color temperature adjustments. All right, so this is, when I switch back to this page, this is the ODT basically. And so in Express Dailies, I'm somewhat limited here, but I have Rec 709, I have hybrid log gamma, or I have HDR10, which is Rec 2020 PQ at 1000 nits. And so if I select HDR10, now we're looking at a PQ log here, but the Shift O button does the simulation. So this is PQ. This would look very, very similar to the sRGB image that we were looking at when it was set to Rec 709. It would look similar to that on an X310 monitor that was set up for PQ, except it would have, you know, 1000 nit brightness on it. But you know, it would have all the color saturation and contrast that you don't see here because this monitor is not designed to display it correctly. But when I hit Shift O, I'm limiting my colors to the gamut of Rec 709, and I'm bringing what was 1000 nits down to 100 nits. So I can, without changing my monitor at all, I can view what it's going to look like in Rec 709 versus what it looks like in HDR10. And that is a very, very cool trick. You don't need to have two monitors. You don't need to switch monitor modes. You can just quickly jump back and forth like that. And Colorfront has demonstrated this to the best eyes in the business that this is 100% accurate and you can rely on it. So we'll go back to Rec 709 for now. I have two color output paths. So, you know, I could have some renders here that are rendering in HDR. I could render Avid DNX36, and I could render another one that was in HDR. And, you know, it would be pretty easy to flip the material in Media Composer if you're a good Media Composer editor. And so ODT and tone mapping, all right? So this is where I basically assign my renders, and we'll get to that in a second. All right, so let's look at color grading. So I'm going to go back to the color tab here. And I have a tangent element, the MF panel here. And so this automatically, you know, works really, really great. And I don't even need tangent drivers for this thing. I just plug it in, and when I launch Express Dailies, it just wakes up and it's fine. And so I can, you know, so if I go, yes?
We got a quick question from John. I don't want to get too far in. And
oh, that's quite all right. I can pause here.
So, yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I wanted to see if you could talk more about these master looks. Are they available as LUTs that we can use on set? It just seems to me like there could be a almost like a visual miscommunication between the dailies and what we're seeing on set if the dailies are having these various like master looks applied.
So you can make a LUT in Express Dailies, 33-point cube of whatever is coming out of the, you know, the output. And so that may or may not work, but in onset dailies or transcoder, where you have all the nodes exposed and you can kind of remove some or put some back or anything, you can make these LUTs as well. And in fact, Bill Feitner does have a collection of these. I don't know if they're still included in the install. At one point they were, but you know, when we have paying customers, we don't mind sort of sharing these, and we're a little careful with who gets them or what have you. But if you had the big brother onset dailies, you can make any kind of LUT you want. In fact, you know, it's sort of a cool byproduct of the app is it's sort of, you know, color central. It you know, you're able to make cubes, and so with the apps, there is a limit of 33 points, but Mr. Feitner himself, he can make 124 point LUTs if you want, you know. I mean, in dailies, you wouldn't, probably 33 would be fine. But when you get into color finishing, it's quite often they want 64 point LUTs.
And he tends not to give those out. For the most part, the dailies ones end up being 33 point.
Yeah. So, yeah, so yes, the answer is yes. If you want to sort of like, you know, have a LUT that represents an IDT and a LUT that represents the tone mapping and another one that represents the ODT, and you want to kind of granulize it like that, then you would definitely need transcoder or on-set dailies in order to make those. If you want to encapsulate, probably you would encapsulate the RRT and ODT into a single LUT, and you would maybe have a different version, like one that goes out to Rec 709 or one that goes out to HDR10, and then the tone mapping of choice. And so, and then what Colorfront has done with the Colorfront engine, and I know some of you know this already, but there is, in fact, a very good working beta copy of an OFX plugin that works in Resolve that duplicates all of the settings of the Colorfront engine and allows you to import the same CFE file. And so it works as a Colorfront engine, and it can also do a neat trick where it applies the Colorfront engine as an LMT for an ACES pipeline in Resolve as well. So it does this very, very cool trick where it inverts out the RRT ODT and sort of replaces it. And in doing so, it's 100% ACES compatible. It's just a very, very flexible LMT. And so that is kind of happening at the same time. There's this new, what is it called? An AFM, Brandon? The AFM?
The AMF.
What is it?
There's the AMF, and then there's the CLF, and then there's like 1,800 acronyms for all things ACES. Yeah, so it remains to be seen sort of what is the preferred way of altering the standard ODT RRT combo. But we have some very, very interesting takes. You can have all of this Colorfront engine goodness in an ACES pipeline, satisfying the people that say it has to be ACES, and still have all the features of the Colorfront engine and the export from the FS-HDR on set. And Brandon's the absolute expert on that, but it's amazing. And yeah, you are. In any case,
so if you click on the out tab, then can you import your own? So like where you say out color, where you had the master looks.
No, you cannot. However, if you talk to Bill, you can sort of design custom ones. And so there's a repository of sort of proprietary Colorfront look files, and they populate this menu, and it's kind of hard coded. But what Bill sometimes does is he substitutes one that you would never use for the look that you want. And I've seen him a half dozen times or so kind of create custom ones. And one day we had fun and we made some like crazy ones like bleach bypass and all this really kind of nutty posterized ones. And sometimes blending a little bit of that in with a more normal one makes for interesting looks. I personally think it would be great if there was some kind of a look designer that customers could get their hands on. But Bill has some stuff that he wrote himself, and his reason for living is not only designing this Colorfront engine and everything, but it's also interfacing with customers. And at 1 in the morning, Bill and I were dealing with e-film color questions last night. So this is what we do. And he, you know, so if you're a Colorfront customer, you have, I guarantee that he will find time for you to create something custom should you desire it. So is it easy? No, you have to be able to book time with him to do it and everything, but is it possible? Absolutely.
And then what a lot of people do too on if you're dealing with a bigger post house, say like Technicolor, that has their Josh Pines of the world and creates a whole look in the whole 9 yards. They tend to bake that into they tend to bake their look or their LMT into a LUT that you can use, and you can, you know, go around the preset looks that we provide.
Yeah, I'm used to a workflow where I have like a show LUT that I create for the show, and then we have CDLs per shot or per scene. So in this workflow, I mean, I'm used to like with Resolve where I could import the show LUT as a node.
Well, you can do that in Express Dailies too, but not within the Colorfront engine. You would use the native pipeline where you're using an input and output LUT. And so, yes, you can use LUTs, and people, more people use LUTs than anything else. But it's not a color managed system. It doesn't automatically translate 5 different camera types into a very, very similar, internal color grading and use the same sort of output that gets you 90% there on your grading. Well, that's what an output LUT could do. But if I have 6 different camera types, then I need 6 different output LUTs. And if I have SDR and HDR, now I have 12 LUTs, and the LUTs might not have the same kind of consistency to allow you to sort of pass grades back and forth between different camera types. So color management, whether it's ASUS or the Colorfront engine, solves all those problems. And I don't know if the industry is ready to just 100% go there, but boy, there are tons of advantages to a properly engineered color managed system. Aside from the fact that we're not used to working that way.
Okay, so it's like a ASUS replacement.
Yeah, it's an ASUS replacement, and if I may be a little critical of ASUS, ASUS suffers a little bit from the too many cooks, and the Colorfront engine is basically Bill and Tomash at Colorfront, and they've designed this thing that I think is a little bit more coherent and doesn't suffer from the same problems. One of the things that, it doesn't really relate to Express Dailies, but one of the things that happens in an ASUS pipeline in finishing is I might have an ASUS pipeline that is working great on camera original material, but I'm kind of married to this ASUS pipeline, and I might be using stock footage or previous shows or what have you that are already graded. And so I have to, ASUS never really thought of that. And so I actually, well, they did think of it, but their technique for dealing with that stuff is I have to invert out the effect of the ODT RDT. Can I mathematically do that? Yes, but I mean, it's like I'm adding a process and inverting it out, where with the Colorfront engine, if I don't need tone mapping, I don't have to have tone mapping. The input to the tone mapping is log C and the output is log C. Whether it's there or not doesn't matter at all to my output. I only need it when I need to tone map, which is, camera log material. But if I have something that's in Rec 709, I can add it to the process, and I'm not, in an ASUS pipeline, if I add Red 709, well, it's going through the RRT anyway. And so I have to add an additional process to invert out the RRT, and my application may or may not make that easy to do.
And I just want to make one note to John. I've used Colorfront Express Dailies on set, and if you want to kind of test what you're trying to do, that's my cat, sorry. If you're trying to test what you do, you can get a temporary license, usually for the duration of your project, and you're able to load all that stuff in and basically make sure that everything that your LUTs and so on and so forth, to kind of double check yourself. But what's also great is you can actually export that project file with your raw files, and the colorists can see what you've looked at as well. So you can do that if you don't want to put it in Resolve. I want to have more compatibility.
Yeah, talk to me if you want an eval. If you've got one of these Macs and you want to play with it, I can personally generate a 1-week license and renew it once. So, happy to do that.
Thank you.
But right. Note that the 7.1 is still in beta phase due to COVID. We were getting close to beta for it. Then COVID happened, and we haven't reprinted a new build with all the development we've done, which has been 500 development builds since the build that Steve is using. So we're now refocusing now that production is going to start spinning back up soon, at least in some degree, to get it into a beta format that we can get out to people that want to test or mess around with.
All right, so let's move on to just basic color grading. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. And if I go Control H, I call up a scope here. And I've got some scope controls here. So I'm going to I'm going to put this in a parade mode that I prefer. So I basically got a waveform that's got an IRE scale here and a vector scope. There is also, if I'm working in HDR, I can put this into HDR Rec 2020 mode. And now my scale for the waveform is in nit values. And instead of a vector scope, I have a color volume indicator. And depending on settings in the settings table, I can basically get a warning when I exceed 1,000 nits or a constraint to P3. This is an HDR, so the scope looks completely whack. So I'm going to put it back in SDR, Rec 709, like that. Okay, so if I get a screen layout that I like, and my still store, let's see, I can move this down a little bit. I can save a preset. I can go to Window here, and I can say Window Layout, and either save as a default or save it and label it, and sort of lock in this position. All right, so something like that. All right, so again, the tangent just works right off the bat. Let me just switch this over to color, and we'll reset this. And so, you know, this is, you know, everyone understands CDL grading, but, you know, basically the offset just brings the whole image up and down. And then based on the fact that I have a transform tone mapping at the back end, you'll notice there's a little bit of image compression at the top. It sort of compresses a little bit, as would an output let, you know, so that's essentially how it works. So the tangent element works great. I hit the B key to put the tangent element in a mode where I can adjust saturation with the left wheel. And then there's some other controls for vignettes and stuff. And I click it a couple more times and I'm back to my basic CDL controls. And so I'm going to reset this at all. So the tangent element works great. If I've got this page on the HUD open, I've got this neat trick that I can do if I don't have an element, where I use the 1 through 7 keys. And the number 1 key is the master slope. Number 2 key is the color angle for the slope. 3 is the master power. 4 is the color angle for power. 5 is master offset, color angle, and 7 is saturation. And then 0 gets me out of that mode again, 0 out of that mode. And so when I select one of those, like if I want to make it brighter, instead of grabbing this slider and moving it just a little bit, I can kind of move across the entire screen. And you get really, really fast at this. Like I can make this brighter, I can hit 5 and just drop the shadows a little bit. If I think it's too warm in the mid-range, I can hit the number 4 key. And then just like a color wheel, I can just drag down towards 4 o'clock and cool that shot off just a little bit like that. And then so if I hit the number 3 key, I can kind of adjust my overall mid-range contrast. And so, you know, you guys are all laughing at me now because I'm grading on the slate, which is like the biggest no-no ever. But so if I've got a look that I like here, yeah, you know, I can, oh, by the way, just because I can, I'm going to just resync all my audio. So when we come to rendering, we'll have some audio. All right, so that was, by the way, just to regress. The equal key means resync the entire timeline again. So everything's in timecode sync now, and the metadata is correct. Okay, so on this clip here, I'm happy with the grade, and I want to apply it to all light grades here. So if I click here and then right-click, I highlight basically some clips here, and I'll just keep moving over until we get to the end of this scene. All right, and there are these yellow bars here, and these yellow bars basically represent changes in the scene metadata as you go along. So now if I just drag this thumbnail across, I apply that grade all the way across to everything in that scene. And the thumbnail for the one that I graded is still the way it was. If I double click on it, it'll update that thumbnail. And it's, all right, so, and then we'll just down arrow, I can scroll through that. If I want to get to this clip, I might want to start with this, and then you know, let's move off the slate so I don't look like an idiot. And then we can maybe adjust the brightness as I want, and then do the same thing. You know, come over here and select all of the clips that I want to apply that to. and just drag this over like that. All right. I just realized something that I want to do it now because I'm remembering it. So I'm just going to jump around. I've got a couple of clips here that I know are just false starts. But I was told that I have to deliver everything. They don't want me to eliminate even the dumbest little false start. So I want to make sure that these have metadata. And so I'm going to open the E key, calls up that metadata window like this. And I don't have any slates here or anything. But what I want to point out is if I hit the plus key on the numeric keypad, if I'm on this clip and I hit the plus key for the numeric keypad, it gives me, it copies the camera scene and then copies the take and increments it one from the previous. So if I want to edit this so it says false start instead, I hit the period key on the numeric keypad, camera gets yellow, I hit it again, scene is yellow, I hit it again, take is yellow, and then I can type false start 1, and then hit enter, and I've now set the metadata for that. Down arrow takes me to the next clip. If I hit the plus key again, it copies everything, and now that's false start 2, all right? So I would have loved to have shown you that a few minutes ago, but now that I remember, there it is, and we're done with that. Back to color grade. All right, so you can see how simple it is to kind of move these grades around this way. Let me show you how the look store works. So the number 1 key opens and closes the thumbnails on the bottom. The number 2 key opens the still store up top. And the still store has 3 rooms. There's the global, daily, and import. And so I can just take a still that I like and just drag it up there and add it to the still store. And then if I'm on a different clip and I want to compare the still I've saved, I hit the 5 key on the numeric keypad to toggle back and forth. You know, like I might notice that this one needs a little bit more red in the cheeks. It's looking a little, but you guys are the colorists, not me. In any case, this is both a still and a grade. And so if I want to apply this grade to these clips, I can just drag this down like that. And now I've applied this grade to the 2 highlighted clips that I had there. So the global look store, anything I store up here is available to me throughout the project. As I change transfer dates, they're up there. The daily look store, I can add clips to, and those are only available to me depending on the transfer date that I'm in. So the daily look store is kind of a good scratch pad kind of a thing where I'm just putting grades up that aren't really sort of so important as to be remembered. And then the global look store might be sort of kind of keystone grades that I want to remember. If I'm doing Grey's Anatomy, well, they set the same camera settings every single time for the you know, the nurse's station, and I've got a grade that works, and you know, I have that in my global, and it's always going to be the same. The daily look store, more of a scratch pad, except it also has a dual function, and that is as I add stills to the daily look store, I can export them all as JPEG HD stills. All right, so it's kind of a dual function. So if I add you know, 2 or 3 grades here, and then go Shift B, I've saved what they call iPad grades, and those get saved to a folder. Let me show you where. I guess it's over here. All right, so they get saved here. So I've just saved these here, and and there's, I think, some control over the naming that's in the settings, but it's a good way to export a bunch of stuff. And then if I want to export a single still, I have a little bit more control over what that is. And I think it's Control-Shift-S, is it? Yeah, Control-Shift-S, still saved, and it goes into document stills. And this can be a PNG or it can be a TIFF, and there's settings that basically adjust that in the settings table. All right. So thirdly, we'll go full screen again. There is the third in the look store is basically, this is where I bring in my CDLs. So I've got a couple of example CDLs here. And like if I just take this red one and drag it down, I'm adding the CDL like that. And they have kind of junk thumbnails here. But if I bring CDLs into the looks folder, what's in the transfer date looks folder, if I'm bringing in CDLs from set, and I have a still, an HD still, usually it's a JPEG or a TIFF or a DPX. If I've got one of those, PNGs work, I think. If I've got one of those and it's named exactly the same as the CDL file, they get married together, and I would have that still represent the CDL, and I'd be able to use the 5 key to compare the still and also apply the CDL grade that way. And again, I can select multiple clips and just bring that CDL grade in and apply it like that. All right, so this is the look store. There's another thing I want to point out is on the numeric keypad, if I hit the number 3 key, I get into this kind of big timeline mode. And this is a way for me to find a clip. You know, I can scroll this, and if I want to get to this clip here, I just select it and I hit 3 again, and I'm directly there. So 3 takes me there, and I can come here, and I'm directly there. So it's a quick way for me to get around the timeline. And the number 4 key kind of does the same thing for the current still store. So if I have 1,000 stills and I'm looking for that interior nurses station for Grey's Anatomy, I can just kind of scroll through a whole list of stills and find what I'm looking for. And then when I come back out again, that still will be visible in the look store, and it will be ready to be applied. All right. So there are some other ways to move grades around. I showed you how you could drag them. You can add them to the still store and drag them back again. There are 3 quick registers on the numeric keypad. So if I have this clip here and it's this red, I can store this into numbers 7, 8, and 9. So if I go 0, 7, I've stored that. And so now if I come to a new clip and just hit the 7 button, I apply that grade. And so if instead I make this something else and we update the thumbnail and I go 0, 8, I've now stored that in 8. So if I come here and I hit 7, it's red. If I hit 8, it's green. And so I can save 3 grades that way if I'm working on a scene and I'm having to go back and forth between 2 different grades. I can save those in those 7, 8, 9 registers and move them around quickly. There's this other thing, what is it? Shift S, I can't remember the hotkey. I don't use it all that much, but it's under Window, and it is the look editor. Shift I. And the look editor allows me to sort of save labeled grades. So if we're on this red look here and I select look number 1 and save it, I've now saved that into that register and I can label it red. And then when I come here on this clip, I can say load, and I add that grade this way. So I can save 12 different looks here. And so why I think this is useful is commonly, or you tell me because you guys are the experts, but in my humble opinion, it's often that you have CDLs from set, you might have a half dozen of them to basically describe the scenes of the day or whatever. You may not necessarily have a CDL for every single clip. And so if I've got kind of a small subset of CDLs that I need to apply, I can kind of load them into a clip, drag them onto a clip, save them as a look, drag the next one on, save it as another look, and label them so that I immediately know what they are, and I don't have to go fishing through this menu anymore. I can kind of set that up so if I have 100 clips to go through and I need to apply one of the different 6 or 7 looks that I have, I can do them from this menu, and they're labeled, and I sort of understand what they are.
Hey, Steve?
Yes.
Hey, not to interrupt, but like at some point, would you mind going over like how you bring in reference images, along with CDLs and compare and make sure that everything's looking up, proper from set, like the files that we would send you?
Yeah. Again, we could probably simulate that by saving the still. Let's do that last, and we'll get around to it.
Sure thing.
Okay. All right. So,
Steve,
yes.
Steve, real quick, one question came up saying, is there a way to rename the look once it's in the look store?
No, there isn't. And look stores, they have, well, maybe there is. Do I know how to do it? Maybe I don't. In this case, this is kind of a cam roll, scene and take. That's how it is. So where would that be? Let's just take a second and have a look. I think that would be under grade. And I think that there may be a way to do this in OSD, but I'm not seeing it in EXD. I do think that that is worth me making a note of. as a feature suggestion. So,
sorry, that was my question, it's Victor here, because this is something that I was particularly struggling. I mean, it doesn't really make sense in your daily look store, but it does make a lot of sense in your global
yes.
look store, yeah.
So rename look names that are displayed. And you would probably want a search function for a look name too.
Yeah, why not?
I mean, maybe it's Christmas. There's a long list of really great ideas that they're, knocking out, but they may not be at the top of the priority list, but it's good to get them into the system in any case. All right.
Steve, I have one more question.
Yes.
When you went to that view with all the thumbnails, do you use that often to just keep an eye on like consistency throughout like the day's worth of footage?
Well,
like to see if something's like too bright or too dark or like something's just standing out.
I don't, but I think it could be used that way. There is, I have to admit, I forget what the keystrokes are. It wouldn't be hard for me to figure out, but there is a way to actually do a split screen between thumbnails on the it's F something or other, and probably my Mac keyboard isn't set up right for function keys right now. But we do have the ability to split screen between two clips on the timeline, and it's not that hard to do. And you can rotate the split in a number of ways and wipe it back and forth. So if you like that idea, the function is there and it's not too hard to do. And I just might not show it right now.
Cool, thank you.
All right, so let's just, I think that kind of covers the grading, unless there are any more questions on it. And we'll just get on to some of the other the zoom functions and everything. But let me just kind of set this back to reset. So if I wanted to kind of wipe all my grades, I could, click on one of these, reset it, and then Control A highlights everything. And I want to drag this everywhere, but it doesn't work well if it's highlighted. So the N key will unselect this one and allow me to apply this to every clip on the timeline as a way of just kind of zeroing it out. Or I could save a zero clip up here and just highlight everything and drag it down, and that would be another quick way to kind of zero out grades like that. If we click on this, like I'll just, because it is so kind of dark, I'll just make this one a little brighter. And then if I go to the sector grading like this, I have sort of very sort of targeted controls over, the red aspect or the green aspect, depending on how bright it is. And you can, in the case of like the red, this is super saturated right here. I might decide that it's not so much the brightness I want, but I might want to just kind of rotate the color out of that most red sort of look there. And this sector grading is great. It fixes like problems with super saturated items like that, but it isn't stored in the ALE the same way that the CDL is. So, the CDL defines the look, in the ALE. And there are other ways to export look files. There's a thing called Express Metadata File, or EMD, that is basically, it's kind of like the Colorfront engine CFE, but it's for any of the color processing pipelines. And it's just an XML that describes everything that was done to the clip, the grading, the resizing, the audio sync, and everything. And so I can export that for the entire transfer date and have little XMLs that are named after the clips that it's kind of a good backup. Or if I want to basically move a project from one machine to another without messing with copying the database over, and just bring the work over, EMD files kind of do that without adjusting any of the master settings. It basically is a way of kind of backing up entire clips and their entire context and everything. So that is sector grading there. We have this vignette I can set here, or I can go to a gradient and adjust a gradient, sky grad, this sort of thing, and even color it if I want. I don't think people use these too much, but they're there. And then in here, there's soft filter, grain, skin tones, and they appear in different places in the the node structure, as I pointed out earlier. Let's move on to zoom. So this is the reframing controls. And so Express Dailies has a target. And the target is usually the editor and master resolutions as set in the encode settings, or if it's the H.264s, the web or devices, usually there's a resolution of the deliverable that you're choosing. But the system has a target, and it's, you know, more often than not, it's HD 16:9. And so the zoom settings basically define what, you know, some other camera aspect ratio, how it fits into that 1920 by 1080 16:9 frame. And so I've got these different modes, and sometimes it's funny, depending on the app that you're using, these can kind of mean completely opposite things. But basically, this footage is all 16:9, so it doesn't really demonstrate this well. But fit all means fit the entire image into the target frame size, letterboxing or pillar boxing as needed, in order so that, you know, if you've got something that doesn't quite match up to 16:9, it fits it all in there and kind of mats it for you. And then fit means you fill the entire target completely, and if there's something that's either too high or too wide, it crops that extra material off. And then center means no resizing at all, but just fit the center of the image into the center of the target without any resizing, and allow anything that's outside of that to be cropped. And then there is a stretch mode, which sometimes can work for anamorphic footage as a starting point for making further adjustments for a framing chart. So fit all would be the safest, but, you know, it's whatever is required. I can adjust my pixel aspect ratio here, and I can tweak it to satisfy a framing chart. And once I've kind of fit all, I can zoom this image in and pan and tilt it as needed. And we'll reset this. And then I can also add letterboxing or pillar boxing. So I can add a 239 here. If I want a 2.4, I just double click on this and enter what I want and move the pixel or so, and now it's 240. And I can add pillar boxing, and we can also flip or flop as needed. And this is kind of a global template setting. So this is where I get to decide if it's too selected or to the default for the camera template. So I make some changes when I'm usually in the first day when I'm setting up to a framing chart. I save it as a default. And so depending on the clip I'm in, it knows what template that clip belongs to. This is airy spherical. So if I'm parked on this clip and I save it to default, I'm updating the airy spherical template. If I move on to a later clip on the timeline, and that's a red clip, and I save that as default, it's going to update the red clips on the timeline, and it's going to change the template for red clips. It knows what clip you're on and what template it belongs to. And so when I say set the default, it's going to change all of the red clips on the timeline, but it's not going to adjust the airy clips when you hit that to default button. I think the to all button just does everything, so they're a little different in that respect. Okay, so that's how these, when you're doing something like, let's say, you know, I've got this zoom in here, and this is important to me because now my framing chart is right. I probably want to save this as a node preset. So most of these pages have the ability to say preset. So if I go in here and I save this as plus, I can option click this and rename this. So we can call this whatever's appropriate. All right, and then so if I get out of this mode and I reset this and I go preset and just click that, it remembers the preset. And these are not project-based. There's a spot in the database where these get saved. So I can set up a burn-in architecture or a particular framing chart, and when I make a new project for episode 2, I'll still have access to that thing that I saved in the presets. So that's cool. So I'll reset that. The second page for Zoom is a pre-crop. Doesn't get used too often, but we had a client where this was super necessary. So that's there now. All right, so that's the framing. We had talked earlier about, hey, I've got spherical and anamorphic footage on the same cam roll, unfortunate, but if you do, then I would set up a spherical shot correctly and save a preset. Then I would save a anamorphic framing chart and save a preset. And then if I, basically select clips on the timeline, basically I think what I want to do is, recall the preset and then, save to selected, So it's not too hard to do that. If we go to the text, this is where the burn-in is accomplished. And so there are two completely discrete sets of burn-in 1 and burn-in 2, and they have 6 regions. And so this is like upper left, upper center, upper right, lower left, lower center, lower right. And these are largely keyword driven, all right? And there's 2 completely discrete versions of it. So if I click on here, I get a menu, and I have a list of keywords here, and this is by no means all of the keywords that you can use. There are many others, but these are the most common ones. So I might want scene and take in the upper left corner. The middle one might be file name, and the right one could be time code. And so I've got, a background transparency. So this is completely transparent, or now there's a black background for the text. I can make the text smaller or larger. There's only the one font, but I can also bring these down from the top or kind of bring them in towards the center a little bit like this. And I can adjust the text transparency independently from this background transparency. And so there's some interesting things I can do with this here. I can kind of customize this text. And so if I've already set scene and take for the upper left quadrant. So if I come here and I go to custom, then if I click on the item, it shows me the keywords that define that. And I can add my own text to this. So I can come over here and I can go scene and take, :space, and now I've labeled that. And then if I come over to the time code and I switch that to custom, again, I see the keyword that's up there. I can label this. So I can say VTC : space. And you'll notice that it kind of, it right justifies over on this quadrant. And if I come to the end here and hit the / key right above return, I can add a second line. So I've moved that down 1 line. And now I can go, let's see, ATC : space. And then I'm going to add the keyword for $ audio TC $. And now I have video time code and audio time code there. And so and then again, I can save a preset for this. I can have a completely different text here, and I can decide which burn-in, either burn-in 1 or burn-in 2 that I'm using for each deliverable when I finally make my deliverables. Lastly, I can add a spoiler here. So I can come down here to spoiler and enter text here, and I can make this very, very transparent as kind of a spoiler. And another thing I can do if we make this is I can make this a logo. So this can be a logo. So let me see if I remember how to do this. I think it's logo Colorfront. That's it. All right, so I've got a logo folder, and so in that logo folder, the logo is called Colorfront, but it could be, DIT or whatever in there, and it would be a little PNG with alpha in there, and it appears there. And so this one has transparency built in, so even when the spoiler transparency is all the way off, it's still transparent. This can actually fill the whole screen. HBO has one that kind of fills the whole screen. Maybe you've seen it. And another cool thing I can do is I can make this a flash burn. So -1 here means off, and if I double click here and put 24, so now if I go to the top of a frame, it's there, and I hit play after 24 frames, it kind of fades away like that. And And in my settings, I can choose if that's at the front, at the back, at the front and the back, you know, and then setting this back to -1 means it's just on all the time. Okay, so I think that's it for the text. All right, so now we'll move on to our renders. All right, so on the output here, these are my 4 different deliverables, and they're organized into kind of, you know, types. All right, so my editor is all my DNX HD, and if my target resolution was larger than HD, I would also see DNX HR listed in here. And all different types of ProRes, and I can choose to render those trimmed broadcast wave files or even Avid MXF files, standalone MXF files. And so we'll stick with DNX 36 here. And so the next group is, I think, not so useful. They're iPad or iPod files. They're all MV4 H.264s and Apple TV. And then, you know, because we forgot it's 2020, you can do a SD DVD that's just a super simple DVD that doesn't even have a menu. You just put it in your machine and it plays. But they look like crap, and I would like to see that go the way of the Whistler. And then more importantly, these are kind of standard H.264s, H.265s. If you have a Copra iPad system on here, we can automatically populate their database with Copra renders. And we have PIX and DAX recipes that do everything you need to submit files to both PIX and DAX. So a DAX deliverable renders individual H.264s, and then it concatenates them into a single MOV file that you upload along with an ALE and a flex file that then again breaks it up into individual clips in the, you know, on their website. And this would be, oh, it would be a lot more difficult to do if you were just rendering out H.264s in Resolve and you had to do the concatenation and everything. So it's really great that this is a worry-free recipe that works all the time and is well vetted. And we can also make Netflix proxy files, and brand new is Frame.io proxy files, which is something that is going to be more and more integrated into Colorfront software. And then lastly, the master is a copy of any of the deliverables in the first 3 deliverables. And in addition to that, I have kind of simple OpenEXRs, TIFFs, and DPX image sequences that can be rendered here too. So I think Express Dailies is not at the same level as Onset Dailies when it comes to doing VFX pulls. But if your needs are fairly modest and you just need to render out some OpenEXRs or some TIFF sequences for an After Effects compositor in, you know, down the hall or whatever, it works perfectly great for that. And so if you're doing commercial grade VFX pulls, there's all kinds of metadata requests and naming requests and this kind of stuff that is better suited by transcoder or Onset Dailies. But if you've got modest needs for these image sequences, it works great for that. Okay, so whether or not one of these items gets rendered is based on whether it's checked off here. So let's just say we're rendering DNX 36 and maybe a 1080 DAX. And then these over here decide what color mode is going into these renders. All right. So I've got my 2 ODTs here. And so I can choose if this render is going to be output 1 or output 2. Right now it doesn't matter, but one of these could be set up for HDR and the other one SDR. So I could choose that this render be HDR and this render be SDR, choosing which output, either output 1 or output 2. And then in combination with that, I can choose which of the 2 burn-in architectures. So I may be using output 1, but I might be using text version number 2 here. And then viewing is basically exclude any text or matting by default. You can kind of adjust what gets included in the settings. But by default, viewing means, you know, I'm either using output color 1 or 2, but I'm not including any burn-in text or mats. So it's the fully graded image, but it's clean, essentially. Grader is an odd bird that I recommend you stay away from unless you know what you're doing, but it is the grade, the CDL grade, without the image transform. So in a native pipeline, if I had LUTs and I chose Grader, I would get the CDL, but I wouldn't get the LUT transform. And I think this was to satisfy a workflow where the master look was upgraded over time, but the dailies needed to be graded and the LUT applied at every stage in the pipeline. And then original means no grade at all, so it would be log C in this case, you know, so you set it to original. There is a cool workflow where if you're rendering out, let's say, DNX HR 444, you might be doing CDL grades. You might be applying CDL grades from set that you guys did, and everything's looking great, and you graded everything, and yet you render out an original ungraded clip and allow the LUT and CDL values to go across to Media Composer in the ALE, where they can be, you know, with a little manual intervention, they can be applied in Media Composer. So the CDL portion of it can be completely automatic. And so, you know, I'm basically rendering out a high quality DNX, you know, HR 444 with the idea that I'm never going to conform back to camera original negative. You know, so for a YouTube show or something like that, it might make sense for, in the case of speed, that I don't bake in my color grades. I apply them dynamically in Media Composer, but I'm passing them along. And when I'm done editing in Media Composer, I can export basically an EDL that contains the CDL values that I used, and then I can color trace those in Resolve. So I can just pass as metadata all the grading work that I did in Colorfront, you know, which may have originated on set. I can pass that into metadata, and then it can be color traced as the starting point, so everything starts off that way in Resolve, but nothing's baked in, so you can continue grading on top of that without any you know, issues. All right, so if I'm not quite ready to render anything yet, well, first of all, this is too big of a timeline for us to render right now. So I'm going to show you how I can make a custom timeline. So I'm going to go Alt-J, and it's going to call up this bin window. And the bin window contains a thumbnail for every clip in the project. And this can be quite large. And there's a mode here where I can look at amount of metadata here with the thumbnails on the side there. And that helps me kind of figure out like path and what the full file name is and that sort of thing. And this can, you know, scroll, or I can right drag like this. And if you hover over a clip, it will tell you its path. If I don't touch the mouse and don't move it, it eventually tells you where the path is. And so this is a good way I can find clips. So I can come over here to search, and I can go A001, and it's going to know that I'm talking about Cameral A001, and it's going to sort everything by that. And I think I can go and A002. No, there's a way to do that. I forget what the Boolean operator is. Bad me. I've got it written down. And then I can sort these as well. Like I could go length. And when I see this kind of auto completion here, if I hit the right arrow, then it completes for me automatically. And so I can make a custom timeline by hitting this little plus button over here. And so we're back to the, unfortunately, I should have done that first before my sorts, but we'll go A001 and sort by length again. So, and then if I want the first 3 clips, I'm just making this short, let's say the first 2 clips. And if I just drag these over to bin, now I've added these 2 clips to this custom timeline. A quick shortcut for loading this custom timeline would be to select it like this and go Control-O. It's allowing me to save changes I may have made to the current timeline I'm on. And now I am immediately in my custom timeline here. All right, and I've got my 2 clips. And it's funny when I'm in a bin like this, it does similar naming to the way it works for the look store up there. All right, so if I want to render this whole timeline, I can click this button here, or I can type Control-R, and it's going to render the whole thing. I also have some other render choices. I can do the render shot. It'll render the highlighted shot. If I highlight several clips, I can choose to render those. If I have select flags, I don't in this case, but if I add select flags, just render the selects, or as another pass, maybe render all of the non-selects. So I have some choices over what gets rendered there. So another thing I want to do is I want to check my audio mix down. So Alt-Y calls up this screen, and this is kind of the matrix for setting up audio mix downs. And I have, in Express Dailies, I have the 4 render groups. There's editor, device, web, and master. And so when I'm in editor like this, it's telling me that only 2 of the tracks that might be sunk with the clips, A1 and A2, are being sent to my render channels 1 and 2. And that's not what I want. Instead, I'm going to hit this same as source button down here. And now it's this kind of chiclet thing goes away, and anything that's been sunk with a clip on the timeline, no matter how many tracks, is going to get rendered. So if this first clip has 9 tracks, that's how many is going to be rendered. And if the next clip has 5 tracks, it's going to automatically go from 9 to 5. All right. The DAX deliverable can only be stereo. So here, I like this. I know that on my polywave files, my first track is the Recordist mix down. So I will be happily allow that first track to go to both channels 1 and 2 of my DAX. And then on the master, by default, that one's the same as source as well. These little icons, the little speaker with the line around it, that defines what you're listening to. You know, so right now, the speaker with a line around it is what gets embedded into SDI. And de-embedding SDI, if I'm using a broadcast monitor, is the best way to ensure that what you hear is as in sync with the video as is possible with the system. And so it's not as tight as if I'm just using the headphone output of the Mac and I'm looking at a broadcast monitor that has a certain amount of delay. They can be somewhat out of sync. I may not care too much, and I could go with that. But if I really want to hear claps go by in real time and be as in sync as possible, it's a good idea if I have a broadcast monitor where I can de-embed audio out to speakers or headphones. And so if I want to change this, like this default video or maybe this default playback, if I want that to be what goes out to SDI, I select it here and I just click the little icon there and I reassign who's going out to SDI. So I've set my editor to same as source. I got my web set up the way I want. There's only one last thing to do before I render, and that's basically set up where I'm rendering and what it's called. So I'm going to go back to my settings, command, comma, and we're going to go to the paths page here. And so I've got editor render path, device render path, web render path, and master render path. And I've got a collection of keywords here that I can edit that defines this example line here based on the clip that I'm parked on. All right. So when I set up the project, I define a path for that project that's in the database. And so that is a project-based path. So render path, which is itself its own keyword, is being defined from the project-based path. But if I want to render somewhere else, I can browse to it, and then this will change. But I like this. I want to render into my project-based path. So render path has been set equal to the project-based path. And then if we look at the editor render path, it's using this render path. So it's defining that much of it by the keyword render path, which is itself equal to project-based path. Then there's a keyword that uses the current transfer date. I am making a hard folder generated. If it's already there, it'll use it. If it's not there, I don't have to make it. It will make it for me automatically. In the case of my DNX deliverable, it will make another subfolder called editorial. And then it defines what the file is going to be called. And I hate this default. All right. I don't want my editorial files to be anything but the original clip name. So I can delete this. And if I right click up here, I get a list of files that I can use. And I'm going to choose clip name. And then I'm just going to click off of that to sort of enter that. And so you now saw this change. So now that the example here is showing me that for this A001C009 clip, it's going to be named this way, and it's going to be found within this folder structure. And we're also doing the web render path, and it's working in a similar way. And I just want to change this so it's not unique ID, but instead should also be clip name. Okay, and so it's going to be scene, take, and then clip name for the individual files that get rendered prior to this concatenation. And the concatenation will be named after the timeline. In this case, maybe we should give the timeline a better name. I don't know if you can do it after the fact, but let's try. If I come over here and double click on this, timeline I'm now in is called render. And I could probably just reload it to make sure that it's now really thought of as being rendered. I should mention, I don't think I ever said this, but you need to save. You know, we're a relational database, but stuff doesn't get entered into fields automatically until you save. So Command S or save, or M, which means save, works. And if you exit a timeline, it saves. And if you fire off a render, it saves for you automatically. All right. So we've named our files. I just want to verify a couple of metadata items and encode. I'm going to include additional ALE metadata, which means any camera metadata will get added to the ALE. And the rest of this is fine. And our audios, again, is 24-bit. I like to check that before I'm rendering. And I know I set this stuff before, but I'm just making the point is that before you pull a trigger on a 40-minute render or something like that, you want to make sure everything's cool. And so if I go Control R or hit render, it's going to render these clips. And so it'll do, it's doing both of these clips simultaneously, or both of these deliverables simultaneously, the DNX36 and the DAX. And we're doing 85 frames a second for both of them. And then when it gets to the end of the deliverable, there'll be a slight pause as the DAX post-process kicks in and makes the concatenation and the flex file and everything needed for the DAX recipe. And that's happening right now. Okay, and so we're done. Hit any key. So let's go ahead and look at what happened. So if we go into our folder structure, into our transfer date here. So this is the generated folder that was created. I've got my editorial. So here there were only 2 tracks for this audio. So, I've got my video files. I've got my Atom audio here. And this is junk. And so we automatically create an AAF, which you can optionally use to bring this stuff into Media Composer. There's a number of ways to do that. And then we automatically create an ALE. And the ALE contains the CDL values and this additional camera metadata. And so that's all automatic. And it happens, I had to do very, very little to make that happen. And if we look at our DAX deliverable, it rendered basically it rendered 2 individual files, and then it did the concatenation for me, and it made the ALE and the flex. So just these 3 things are what gets uploaded to DAX. And I think in the case of PIX, there's a way for me to actually set it up so that the upload happens automatically. So it makes making these files, which might otherwise be very complicated and difficult, pretty easy. All right. And so I also should probably point out that here on the output page, I can regenerate certain sort of, whether it's EMD files or an ALE. And there is a cool workflow where, if I have an editor that says, hey, I only want to edit with the mixdown. I don't want any of the individual audio tracks. There's a cool workflow where you render files with all of the audio tracks, and then you come back after that has been done and you have the properly ALE that identifies all of the audio tracks. and then you come back and you change the encode parameters so that the ALE should only be writing one audio track in the ALE, and you output a second ALE. And then in Media Composer, you import your, you bring in your DNX renders with all of the audio tracks, and then you make subclips based on the second ALE, and you get subclips that only have the one track. And then later, if the mix was sucky on a particular clip, and the editor wants to go back and inspect the various audio tracks for lab mics or whatever, he can, basically, frame match back to the original master clip of the subclip that has all the audio tracks, and everything's in sync and can be cut in properly. And so it's kind of an advanced Avid thing, but we make that easy to do. All right, so I think we're on to QC now, if there's no questions on any of that. Let me just check my notes really quick. Rendering. It's worth mentioning that if I come up here and submit to background render, I can render in the background. And so even on the same machine, if I have a powerful machine like I do here, I can fire off a render in the background, and it basically opens up a headless version of the application, and the render can proceed in the background. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if I have several machines, they basically point to the database. It can either be hosted on one of the Macs or on a third machine, and you just kind of point with an IP address at that database, and then it can distribute the renders. So if I'm in a post house where I've got 10 Express Dailies, I can have 5 of them rendering in the background and chew through my stuff. All right, so Ben window, we looked at that. All right, QC. Let's look at QC real quick.
Can I have I'm sorry, can I have one question about
Yes.
the ALEs? They're super useful. I always found them, never had issues with the Colorfront ALEs, unlike, my DaVinci ALEs always were lacking somewhat. But I've had a job where the request from the editor was to include the episode as part of the clip metadata, and that should be the part of an ALE. And I believe episode is not how it's standardly set in Colorfront. And
Yes.
there was, it wasn't easy. It could be done, but I needed a guy, really somebody who changed my ALE generator.php somewhere. It was pretty geeky stuff from my point of view.
Yes.
Is there a way to make it maybe easier what gets included in the ALE or what does not?
Yes. So there isn't a GUI for it, but there is a process that you go through in order to get that done. And that is, you call me and I do it for you. So that's,
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
that's a part of what I do. So I might be one of the geeky guys that does this. So myself, my colleague Elliot, Brandon can do it, and Tibor and the support staff in Budapest are all good at this. And so there are so many requests, and it's such a complicated thing that Colorfront has never really come up with a GUI for this, but it is an editable PHP script. And I am not a PHP genius, but I've been doing this for so long that I probably already have an example of anything that you want to ask for. And there's kind of common things. Hey, I need twice as many audio tracks. Hey, I need my scene and take, to be, labeled this way, and don't use a hyphen, use an underscore, and all this kind of stuff. And so yeah, the easiest, if you're a power user, you may learn to do this yourself, but probably you have better things to do. But it's one of the things that I'm happy to do for you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We have talked many times about making it a GUI, and that could be as complicated as the app itself. So it doesn't rise to the level of other more important things that the engineers might be working on. So I agree that it would be great if there was a GUI, and there might be a compromise where there's like 2 or 3 things that you can do in a GUI that are like the most commonly asked for changes. I think that would probably be a very useful thing. Anyhow, I'll make a note of that and kind of revisit that idea, because I do think you're right, but there's not going to ever be a full-blown GUI to do everything you can do in the PHP script. One thing that we are doing in the process right now is that we're transitioning from, there are PHP scripts for defining the ALE generator. There's also PHP scripts for defining PDFs. And those are the ones that get changed a lot. And so if you're, a power user customer, you do it yourself or you ask us to help you or whatever. But we're in the process of switching over to a JSON format for all of these. And it's, for the most part, it simplifies the editing of it and makes it easier for customers to do that sort of thing. The downside is it's not quite as flexible as PHP, but it's a lot more obvious as to what's going on. So PHP gives you control over every, the pixel location of everything, every single item on a PDF or whatever. The JSON might not do that, but it'll be super obvious to change a key pair so that it represents something different, like an episode.
We got one more question from Chase.
Yep.
Hey, I'm sorry, it's not a question, but I just wanted you to highlight the finalize function, because it's so amazing when doing dailies in television that, say you were doing this in Resolve, and Steve, you can explain this, but like, say you're doing dailies in Resolve, you would have to re-render everything. And in Colorfront, it's continually updating. So all you would have to do is re-update and refinalize, and it will relatively quickly spit out another, H.264 or whatever you need to upload.
Yeah, if I have sort of several render passes during a day, like if I'm rendering in groups of cam rolls or something like that, I might be making a DAX deliverable several times during the day. And if I come back and I say finalize DAX, it will basically make a concatenated file and ALE and flex for the entire day's worth, So if I, instead of uploading a separate DAX render for every single cam roll that I did, I can wait until I'm done rendering all of the cam rolls and then finalize that. And so that works for pics, DAX, and DVDs. Is that good enough, Chase?
Yeah, I just love the feature, so I just wanted to highlight it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it. I wouldn't have mentioned it otherwise. All right, let me show you how QC works.
1 second, we got one more thing.
Okay, yes, please.
I just want to ask about working with multiple episodes. You kind of mentioned that you create a whole new project for each episode.
That seems to be the, at least with the guys that I have a great visibility on how they work, that seems to be the way they do it. There's a couple of post houses where I'm just kind of like there's sole means of support period, and I see a lot about what they do. So does the next guy do it completely differently? Maybe. But in the case of this one place in particular, they prefer to have separate projects per episode. Or sometimes they combine a couple of episodes, like this will be episode 1 and 2, and the next project will be episode 3 and 4. And there's a certain, it avoids the problem of having like too many stills or this sort of thing. If you can reach a point where the project has grown too big for its own good, and so having kind of separate episodes, it keeps the database size manageable, it keeps the stills list manageable, and what have you. So in that case, usually templates are created so that there's a good deal of so they're homogeneous essentially. They're all the same.
I mean, sometimes we have shooting days where we're shooting from scenes from different episodes on the same day, maybe even on the same roll.
Yeah. I hate that when that happens, but I know it's a real life thing. Yeah, so do I have a great way of dealing with that if you have separate projects per episodes? Not so much. If that were a constant fact of life, I might, try to keep all my episodes in one project. I mean, aside from kind of separating out that footage, which, there's lots of reasons why you might not want to do that. You know, you know, some people do anyway, but you know, you want to keep your archives together and all this kind of stuff. I don't know. There's a couple ways to skin the cat, and I think that, in my humble opinion, and ever so humble, and it means absolutely nothing, I would avoid that whenever possible. But in that case, I think probably best practice would be to keep a bigger project going where all that stuff can kind of be shared between. Yeah, it's just even how you deal with it on a timeline. There isn't a fantastic way of dealing with that except to make custom bins. So, you know, if I had a timeline and I had stuff that was between 2 episodes and everything, the way I would deal with it would be I would make bins. That, when I say bins, it's really custom timelines that relate to a particular episode, and I would separate the footage that way, and hopefully there would be some kind of metadata in the clips and everything that would allow me to do that somewhat automatically by using the search feature in the bin window, you know, to search for that metadata item and then separate those into custom bins. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, if I explained the need for a whole new set of features in order to deal with, you know, multiple episodes being shot on the same camera, I think the Colorfront engineers' heads would explode.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with the reality of working on set versus the, you know, engineers, not, because it's like the reality is it's just a triage sometimes. I mean, here in Chicago, we do the Shameless. And when Shameless comes through, we usually shoot maybe 4 to 5 different episodes, sort of all intermixed, with multiple units and multiple cameras on each unit, and it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, well, so Colorfront, you know, just a quick little history lesson. You know, the Jasbrini brothers, who are the owners of Colorfront, they along with the top engineers that are still with Colorfront, developed essentially what became Luster, one of the first sort of major sort of software-based grading applications, which was eventually sold to Autodesk. And the Jasbrini brothers worked at Autodesk for a while in support of Luster, and Luster is still alive today as a part of Flame. And when they left Autodesk, they created a post house in Budapest, and they couldn't legally make a color corrector. So they had a post house in Budapest, and they found themselves doing a lot of dailies, and they started, you know, basically creating the application onset dailies and then express dailies out of that. But they do have a post house in Budapest, and it's the biggest post house in Budapest, and a lot of people go to Budapest for that Eastern European vibe. And so, you know, they do a ton of dailies, and they have DITs and everything. So they are sympathetic to the cause because they are first and foremost a post house, a working post house in Budapest. So, you know, Onset Dailies was written internally first for their own work, and then only secondary became a product. So, you know, so that's somewhat informed by, you know, whatever constraints they enforce on their workflows or whatever in Budapest. But, you know, I'm sure you don't have a whole lot of control over how it's done. But, you know, if you have some suggestions on how it could be improved, I'd love to hear it.
Could you talk about bringing in CDLs, and is there like an automated process where it can match CDLs to the clips?
Currently, CDLs are manual unless they're a CDL EDL. All right, there's, you know, we have talked about doing it through file names, but quite often, you know, I mean, you would have to do that ahead of time. It could be possible, but it doesn't exist in Express Daily. So CDLs, EDLs, yes, totally automatic. CDLs or CCC lists or whatever, it's kind of manual, but it is possible to completely automatically apply with very little operator intervention CFE files. So the CFE files that you might create with Pomfret LiveGrade and the FSHDR can be applied completely automatically. provided they're named properly ahead of time.
I would say the CDL, the CDL EDL from Resolve works also beautifully. I've used it for 130 days. It's amazing.
Yes.
Keep in sync. And also, I would one last comment on this episode thing. We on those episodic TV, we shoot per blocks. And block is always block 1 is episode 1 and 2, and so on. So it happens a lot that you mix episodes within one day, and it was perfectly and part of the question with changing the ALE generator to include episode, and episode was part of the metadata. So when you go clip by clip and fix your audio metadata, or maybe enter a new one for some false starts, as we've seen, then you just have a episode field. I had it at the first place, so I never have, I change it, once per day. What says 101, 102, whatever, and it worked beautifully. So I had no issues with mixing episodes within one shooting day, and basically still keeping a single project for the whole show.
Right. And so did everything get rendered as multiple episodes all at once, or did you have to render them separately as episode render 1 or episode 2?
No, I've just rendered my whole day, and it was maybe including episode 102 and 103, and that was, because it was all part of the ALE. And the editor was happy, they never complained. It's just actually, this was their request to have episode as part of the ALE and as part of the clip metadata. So,
right, so that's easy to do. I can do that for you easily if you don't have it, or you can learn how to do it, so that when you encounter a fresh system or something like that, you can set that up. It's not hard. I can teach anybody that wants to add that metadata field how to do it. So yeah, so in that sense, maybe it's not so hard to deal with multiple episodes. I was envisioning that they would have to be rendered separately and kind of dealt with separately, and have PDFs that are separate and all those kinds of things. If that doesn't matter so much and you can kind of deal with it as a single project, then yeah, then you can have metadata that tells you what episode the clip belongs to. All right, shall I move on? I've got a couple more items to look at. All right, so let's clean up our screen here. And let's go back to the all takes timeline. Okay, so I have the ability to set QC items for a QC report, and Shift Q calls up this little widget. And the little widget allows me to, if I see something that I want to mark, I can put this in frame mode and I can make a new event. It remembers the current time code, and then I can type a comment here, so. And then if I move on to another location, I can frame, I can add a second one, and all right, so, and then I can use my left, right arrow keys to jump back and forth. So this can also be sort of a memory location item that you can use. Hard to do both at the same time, but if you don't care about your QC markers, you just want to remember where the closest slate is, you can certainly set these and then queue back and forth between them like that. It's also possible to do one that's a range, so if I come here and I'm in frame and I set a mark here, we'll just label this range. And then so if I switch this over to range, then I can move forward and then just control click to update the range of this. Right? And so the arrows will take you to the front of the range. All right, so these buttons down here at the bottom can be programmed to be commonly entered items. So if I go into my QC settings here, it's these dashes with the commas. So I can label the buttons. So this could be focus. And this one could be boom mic. And this one could be crew in the shot. And of course, bubbles. All right, and so immediately it closes that and I have to reopen it, and now the buttons are here. So if I make a new mark and we're in frame and I add a comment here, I can say crew and boom, like that, and add those. I can also select, you know, if I've got a boom mic or where I might look for it, upper left, for instance, and I can give it a 1, 2, or a 3-star rating. And so if I save to the database, I can go over to File here, and I can say Generate Report and generate PDF report. And it will make a nice looking PDF. It has thumbnails for all of my clips here. And you can see it's got all of these QC ratings and stuff in it like this. And there is a PDF generator file that allows me to sort of customize the columns that I use. And there's a setting for filling out, a settings page for filling out this top of the dailies report. And one thing that people do is they usually customize their own logo up here in the corner, which is can be referenced in that PHP file that basically decides how this is made. All right, so that's the QC widget, and then let's see. I just lastly, I kind of wanted to show how the archive works. All right, so the archive basically, I have the ability to ingest material with checksums, and so it can work like a you know, shot put or whatever, and brings files in, and then I can also do LTO backups, and it works very, very well. It maybe doesn't have the full feature set that Yada has, but it it works well, and it generates checksums that can be used again and again in Colorfront. And so the way it works is if we go to my path window here, and I scroll down to the video archive path, I've got a preset that I saved for this that I want to use. So I'm going to just open up this archive path list, and this is easy enough to remember, but I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to put this into this archive path, which I think it already was, but let's just, yeah, it was. And then, so in that text file, mainly what I'm interested in is this. This is kind of my tried and true LTO sort of path structure. So we'll copy that, and that will go in place of this. So we'll just paste that in like that. And so it's basically this path to this folder archive, which is in my render path, should be a path to an LTFS LTO, or there can be up to 4 of them, I think. We have the second one, yeah, up to 4. I typically have done 2. And so this would be to the root directory or a folder at the root directory of an LTFS LTO. And then the actual path beyond that is the archive-based path, which is defined by this. And then it's going to create a folder transfer date, and then it's going to put as a folder name the clip name, and then it's going to make subfolders for both video and audio, and then it's going to use the original file name. All right, so I've got that all set correctly. And so the LTO archive is going to use the background render engine, which is controlled by this little sort of icon in the menu up here, which is a service that listens for renders that have been added to the database. And it also has the ability to look at a render queue where I can see jobs that are queued up. And I can, usually I'm queuing up a cam roll at a time for archive to LTOs, but I can queue up every single cam roll in the list, and they'll just kind of list here and fire off one at a time. And in the case of LTOs, it sort of ignores the distributed rendering capabilities of EXD, and it targets only a single machine where the LTOs are attached. And so we'll close this out of the way. And so now I'm going to escape out of the system. And just so I don't do something stupid, I'm going to make sure this folder structure exists. So it doesn't exist. I had pre-baked this, and this will take about 10 minutes so we can take questions or whatever, but I'm going to do a cam roll, but I'm just going to talk about the pre-baked one I want. I originally saved this as archive and I named it as archive 2. So the archive folder doesn't exist. I think it'll automatically be created. So we're out here in the load list. If I select my first cam roll like this, I just say archive card. And then it's going to ask for, because this is a new LTO, so to speak, it's going to ask for a UUID number for that LTO, which should be 6 digits. And then when I hit go, it should open up the background render process and start rendering to it. So this is what it looks like when you're background rendering, is this separate sort of, you know, this is a headless version essentially of Express Dailies. And it's, you know, it's archiving around 400 megabytes a second to fast local storage. So depends on how, you know, what LTO drive you're using, but it should probably hit these kinds of speeds. And so it's going to go through and it's going to archive everything, and then it's going to go back and do an MD5 checksum. So this, again, it'll have to go all the way through this and then through it again. So let me just show you what the pre-baked version looks like. So here is my transfer date. And for each one of these clips, I have 2 folders. And this is the way I like to set up LTOs. There's a couple ways to skin a cat. But here is my source file, and here is my source audio. Per, you know, so it's smart enough to understand what audio has been associated with what picture. I can come back as a separate pass and back up all the audio, period. And that's usually what I do, because if I don't do that, I may miss wild track files. And I think it's useful later on to have the audio sort of, audio doesn't take up that much room, have the audio on a per clip basis, and also have a folder full of audio. And there's another way as a second pass to kind of do that. And then at this level here, I have this text file that gets made automatically that basically tells me the hash values, the MD5 hash values. But important information is everything is passed up here, nothing has failed, and the date that it was done, and it contains the hash values. And this information here can inform, at the end of the day, after how many ever cam rolls I've rendered, it can inform a nice PDF version of an archive manifest that, you know, is, you know, something that you would hand to a client or something like that, not this text file. And if we close this, and sure. And this is the file that just keeps the hash values that Colorfront will use whenever it needs to sort of use these hash values again. This is kind of like the you know, the memory of the hash values as they were done the first time that would be compared later on with an MD5 process. So now we're in the verification path, and essentially the same thing I just showed you is being created within this path. So that's LTO backups, and there's a similar way that I can bring in you know, bring in source files, and I can use my path to copy them into the transfer date or possibly the subfolder within the transfer date as I bring in, and it will create these MD5 checksums. And so if it's already got those MD5 checksums for the clips, then it doesn't have to do as much work here in the LT, making the LTO. It only has to basically check the destination and not the source when it does its verification path. So if it finds this file already there, it'll use it and then call up a warning or something if there's something that doesn't match. All right, so there's just one more thing I wanted to show you, and there's this kind of, this is the Copy Central. There's this cool little sort of dialogue that shows you what's going on, and doesn't look like I think if I'd left it there long enough, the progress bar would have updated. And if I go back to show cards, all right, come on, show cards, one click, thank you, wait, thank you. One thing I forgot to mention earlier, I just wanted to touch on, is if I want to bring in a CFE file, I can bring them in either as an entire timeline, where it compares the name of the CFE to the name of the clips on the timeline and immediately applies them automatically. So when we had talked about automatically applying CDLs, this is the new CDL, we'd like to think. And you know, there's a whole lot more information that is stored in here, including the entire context of the CDL, which is just fantastic because it's kind of married to this CDL. You need to know how the CDL was created in order for it to be useful. And because you're the DIT, you're going to do that perfectly, but still it can get lost down the line. So, you know, CDLs are vulnerable to that happening, and the CFE file isn't. And then if I want to load a single one, I can just choose basically load CFE file. And if I go to the desktop, I've got some, and oops, I didn't want to double click. Let me try that again. Load CFE file and desktop CFE, and these are probably some wacky grade. So just that simple if I want to manually do it, but it can happen for an entire timeline, and I can export them for an entire timeline. So what's cool about it is I can bring in CFEs, and then in dailies I may do some, you know, variations on the grade that was done on set, a little shot matching, that sort of thing, and then I can export new CFEs just as easily for the entire timeline. And these CFEs can be used in all of the Colorfront applications, on-set dailies, transcoder, and then on to Resolve and Nuke as these plugins, CFE plugins, become ready for prime time. And so I think that is my demo. And any more questions or anything anybody specifically wants to see, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, feel free, guys, if you have any questions. Now's a great time. Steve, is there anything else?
I think that's it.
Hey, Steve, actually, I would like to see a little bit of the playheads. When you do dual playheads to match colors back and forth?
Yeah, so if I'm here, I can sort of go into a do playhead mode by hitting the / button above the return. And so now I have a blue playhead and a yellow playhead. And so if I come here, I can now go back and forth between them that simply. And this is how you split the playheads for doing a screen split. Do I remember how to do that? I think it's F5, F5. No, I don't think, I think I have to go through the process of making sure all my function keys are off. But,
I think it's shift backlash. Yeah.
Well, shift, yeah, man, you are so right. Thank you for that. So the little blue button allows you to kind of shift this, and then if I shift, I should be able to kind of tilt this. And so I'm scrubbing on one clip, and then if I hit this, now I'm scrubbing on the other clip. So I'm hitting the / to kind of switch between the active playhead. And then I can kind of swipe this over, and then a shift drag will change the angle of it. And then shift / to get back into normal. And then so if I hit the / key, I toggle back and forth between the two playheads. But the bracket keys right next to them are just another way of selecting playhead 1 or playhead 2. And if for some reason I want these playheads to go away, the only way to do it is to escape out of the timeline and come back in again. And then I'm back to a single playhead. And that's what I know about.
Sweet. Anything else, guys? Any questions? Any burning desires?
Can I have one last one? First of all, thank you for this great demo. And I just want to come back to something that's been briefly mentioned, but because when I was setting up my first on-set DaVinci or live grade, you know, and then Colorfront for creating dailies project, I've ended up using the native mode because that was the only way where, you know, where I've doing side-by-side comparisons when I was achieving the same sort of results to what I'm seeing on set. So basically, my workflow was live grade on set with CDLs, then reapplied in Resolve, kind of double checked by the on-set data wrangler, DIT. And he would also, you know, level out any sort of live grade inconsistencies. And then with a CDL EDL file, actually, I think this is, I don't remember it right, but there's something in DaVinci that's, you know, you have to create an EDL if you want to, or you create a CDL but an EDL file. Then it worked beautifully in Colorfront with the native pipeline. But, you know, I would obviously want to use the Colorfront engine because it seems, you know, just a better way, you know, even a better way than ACES, but just struggling to understand what my workflow would be, what I would use on set, maybe live grade, maybe Aja FS HDR. But if I, you know, what would I use? So it automatically basically comes up as what I've seen on set when I bring it into the Colorfront. That I struggle to understand a little bit.
Well, you can use the color management in Resolve to essentially get any camera. Let's say you're working with Venice cameras. You can basically use the Resolve color management to get you into the working space of log C. So you can kind of use what Resolve does automatically to automatically sort of take care of the IDT section of it. And in my experience, this has been perfectly accurate for a Colorfront engine. And then if I had a couple of LUTs, let's just say I'm going with the standard master look, and I need to monitor either in HDR10 or Rec 709. If I had two LUTs, you know, I would put them as global LUTs in Resolve, and I would have, you know, I would switch back and forth between either the Rec 709 output or the HDR10 output, but I would have a LUT that concatenates the master look and the ODT. And then my CDLs that I do behind that LUT would match, you know, perfectly well for a Colorfront engine import. You know, so I would be using, you know, basically the Colorfront engine can be reduced to a LUT, and you would need a separate one for any kind of display output change that you would need. But probably that would only be two, SDR and HDR. And you wouldn't have, you know, the cool features of being able to simulate SDR within an HDR container or this sort of thing. But probably you could get work done that way. And, you know, a 33-point LUT would be at the edge of being, you know, kind of invisible as far as any kind of interpolation errors or that you would be concerned with. You know, if I might be inclined to ask Bill for a 64-point version of the LUT, and then it wouldn't be an issue at all. You know, the artifacts usually happen at the edges, like at the shadows, the deepest shadows or the brightest highlights or this sort of thing. But most mid-range stuff is just fine at 33 points. So that is the poor man's Colorfront engine in Resolve, and Colorfront's maybe not too interested in promoting that because they would much rather that you use a Colorfront OFX plugin that gives you control over the entire Colorfront engine within Resolve, and then actually has these neat little tricks about, you know, but the problem, you know, I mean, the having a plugin like that is fantastic, but still there are various stages. There's various compositing applications. There's, you know, for that to be fully successful, you would have to have that Colorfront engine plugin work in every possible step of the road. And that's where a LUT is just a lot more convenient. So, you know, you could definitely, probably it's a good idea in Resolve that the IDT part of it be, you know, I mean, really the Colorfront engine, the simplicity of it is that it's just log C, you know, or it could even be CCT. So, I mean, if you want something that's kind of universal, well, most grading applications have a capability of getting from, you know, camera original color space through an ACES compatible IDT into ACES CCT. So Colorfront engine will work perfectly well in ACES CCT. You just need to kind of set it up that way for starters. And then if you handle the tone mapping and the ODT, or, you know, the flop to display referred color space, as a LUT, then that LUT applies equally well in Resolve or Digital Vision or Baselite or Clipster or wherever you go with it. So that's the most universal thing, but you're completely and utterly locked into, you've reduced it to a single transform and you can't control anything. So you might have several versions of it. And, Colorfront, they're thinking way beyond what a LUT can do. They're thinking about, the volume of light in the room and all this kind of stuff. And you want to be able to make these adjustments. And the Colorfront engine contains all of that. And so it's great if you can leave it live. And so the Colorfront engine, I think, will give ASUS a run for the money if there's a plugin for, Resolve, and there's another one for Nuke and Fusion right off the bat, but even maybe further down the line, it's just available everywhere. But we've already, we've got a technique for using it with Pomfret LiveGrade, which clearly is the big dog in the live environment. And Colorfront is doing a good percentage of the episodic and filmic dailies. And then, down the line, Transcoder is often, making, using potentially CFEs and portions of the Colorfront engine to do transforms and everything. And it's nice that it has this kind of compatibility and everything. It's really, color correcting mainly and compositors that need to sort of have the ability to have this variable Colorfront engine.
And in regards to that, from the Colorfront side, we are working on the same plugin that works in Resolve, which was supposed to go into beta a long time ago, but COVID. That exact same code can actually be used inside of Nuke and also inside of Maya. We've tested it inside our office in Budapest. But something like, Baselite, the way they deal with their OpenFX plugins is kind of in reverse to everybody else in the world, just to make it difficult. But we are working, slowly to build up to kind of have it be a little bit more universal, as Steve alluded to. And then as soon as we get it into like a beta type of format, I'll definitely throw it up in DIT and try to get feedback from you guys who wants to test it, play with it, in conjunction with, say, using, I know you commercial guys tend to use Resolve for daily. So if you're using, like Chase is using an FSHDR on a show and he wants to do his dailies in Resolve for whatever reason, the work that you're doing in LiveGrade, exporting the CFE can work inside EXD or OSD, but as well as like throw it into like a commercial space, like kind of workflow with Resolve, and kind of get the ball rolling on that. The trick is, from our perspective, to be, candid, is, we're not exactly the $50 plugin company. And our support, as most of you who have experience with us, is kind of top notch. You get an email, you get Steve, you get this quick response. If it's a massive bug or a blocker bug, as we call them, we'll drop basically everything to get you guys back up and going again. Where plugins, are a little bit, different. It's kind of like, okay, put in your feedback, put in your bugs, and, we'll kind of update it when we can. So that's one of the things that, we've internally, talked a lot about to try to figure out, like, how do we maintain the quality of support that we give to everybody, but at the same time, not get tied up because all of a sudden there's, say, 600 people using the plugin. So yeah, so it is one of the things that we are working on. And as soon as it's in beta, we're going to get it out to people to start playing back and get us feedback before it's a fully released in the wild product.
Sweet. I have a question for both of you guys. Just because I think some people still don't understand like CFE and how it's going to be implemented in LiveGrade, but also other applications. Like, when do you guys think? I know you just touched on it, Brandon, but when do you think that's kind of going to be ready? Like, when people will feel comfortable to switch over to like just creating and sending CFEs? Probably along with CDLs, but obviously it's not the same thing. But like, what can you guys just talk more about, like, why you think CFE is the way of the future, if you do?
For when it's going to happen, I know
for DITs.
For when it's going to happen, we're actually looking at now that production is spinning up specifically in places like Budapest, so our team is heading back to work. They're getting back into the office and have been for over a week. So now we're starting to look into like, okay, we did all this other stuff related to other projects during the time, and now we need to get EXD, specifically EXD on the Mac Pro platform, into beta mode to get it out to people. So EXD 2020, that's top priority. And then behind that, and in kind of conjunction with that, along with like our other product lines, is getting the Resolve plugin to a state where we can actually get it to people. Currently, it's probably mid-July, early August when I can get it to people, with an official full release, sometime in September, October. It's kind of like our ballpark right now, pending if the world continues to set itself on fire. And then in general, from the Colorfront side, for people using it, we're looking for projects that want to test it. We have been using it in Budapest on a project from set. So they're using LiveGrade on set. They're only working in SDR, and they're taking the CFE file, which I think I coined it as the CDL on steroids, because it has your input color space, your scene referred adjustments, such as exposure, saturation, tint, which is all done on the IDT side. Then it has your CDL information, your LMT, your RRT, and your ODTs kind of behind that, and it's all like, Steve showed a picture of one on his presentation, and we can send examples to people if they want to see one. It's just a text file. It's a JSON file, completely editable. But the bonus to it is the pieces, say the 5 segments of it, are independent of each other. So I can change my like your CDLs would remain the same, but I changed my ODT from 709 to HDR10. I don't need to go back and redo a new color pass just because I'm now in HDR or going down to SDR. Each piece is separated from the other one without affecting all the other things in line. And then the details of the CFE are more useful, as you guys all know, and we all know. If I handed Jamie a CDL right now and didn't tell him shit, he wouldn't know, like, is it on a red camera? Like, what color space were you grading in? All those things that affect a CDL aren't currently there. And then one of the things that Steve mentioned earlier is for ACES 1.2, we're actually the first software company to actually support ACES 1.2, and that includes getting our CFE engine as an LMT. So it's called CFE LMT. So you can actually create this look and say, Pomfret or whatever, and actually export that and implement it and put it into an ACES pipeline, and it would be a seamless interaction, and then that can also be archived per the ACES specification. So it's it's a lot of moving targets. We've got a lot of people, Jamie, Chase, and a couple other people that are really behind wanting to get it to work, and some studios are looking into it. Some streaming places are looking into it. So it's something that we're pushing for, but we're trying to be as open as possible with the technology. So it's not like, oh, I'm locked into using Colorfront. It's like, here's a text file, use it wherever you need to use it based on your workflow. So yeah, I hope that answers your questions, Jamie. Yes, I can get you a sample CFE file. I'll throw one up in DIT. I'll just post up a couple sample files on that one. So that's easy.
And you still do a CFE file per shot?
Yeah, you can do it per shot. You can do it per scene. It's just like a CDL. There's just more information in it. So however your workflow works is how it will be, implemented for you. So.
Have you guys implemented the notes from our last one about like round tripping with the dailies operator?
No. There are
Come
tickets.
on, bro.
Oh, come on, dude. If I could tell you all the different things I've been dealing with, man. But yeah, no, it is. There are tickets for it. There's also the versioning question and how to handle that. Because ACES 1.2 has versioning, or is gonna have versioning inside their file. So I could send you a text file, you can change it, and then instead of having 2 different files, that one file gets uploaded, and it has multiple versions in it, and then a plugin or a tool set you could just go, oh, version 1, version 2, version 3. Like, you can actually select what you're doing. There's a lot of let's say discussion about whether that's good or bad, and so that is also being discussed. But if anything ever pops up, you just reach out to us, and we can at least add it to the to-do list. So
sweet. Hopefully there's a world soon where we leave CDLs behind and we're just doing CFEs.
Yes.
And for the
what? Go ahead, Chase.
Sorry, guys. For those of you still on the call, later this week, the 13th, in the advanced lab grade class, I will be demoing the FSHDR, and I'll have it up on 2 different DM250s and an LG C9. So it'll be a neat demo. So tune in.
Awesome.
And Steve couldn't demo that today because Chase has the FSHDR.
Nice.
Sorry.
It's all good. Dave Satin, go ahead.
Wondering what the roadmap to Pomfret integration of all this is, since that's the other part of it that might be the elephant in the room.
Well,
I think their beta already has support for CFE, right?
Well, it's more a marketing thing. I think about what's going to happen with this tool set, right?
Well, the CFE has been supported inside Pomfret as a licensing option for since just after IBC last year. It's not new. So you just have to email Patrick and the guys and say, hey, can I get a test license or whatever? I don't know how their licensing works. I stay out of that stuff, but it's been available safely, for public release since, say December, if not longer.
All right. Well, hasn't been my experience, but maybe I'll try again.
Yeah, it's an additional license. I know that's all.
Oh, I'm aware of that. They don't. It's not priced. They're not really sure. Support's not really sure how to sell it. Somebody who has bought into this more than most, I think. It's a little frustrating, only because I don't have a way to implement this in the hardware that I've got that I use every day. Well, that I used to use every day back when I used to work.
Yeah, no, I can if it's confusing to you and a majority of people, I can reach out to Patrick to help get some clarification from them to kind of everybody to clarify where things stand.
Might be good.
Done and done.
All right. Any other notes, guys? Any other questions?
I got another question. Is there anything new with Copra streaming to the iPads and stuff?
Yeah, we support Copra. We have for a while, if I recall, Steve. Right?
Yeah, it used to be in the early days of Express Dailies, the installer installed everything that you needed in order to populate the Copra database and automatically send clips to the iPad. And when it was like that, I understood how it worked, and I could set up a system. Now we still make the Copra files, but it's no longer sort of included in the installer. So you have to, if you're a Copra user, you've got the database in there, and IVAR, somebody tells you what you need to do to make it work with Express Dailies. But we write the files, and when the Copra side is set up properly, it's automatic. It gets ingested into their database and distributed to the iPads. So we write the file, as a recipe now, but we don't include the database.
Yeah, and then when we do demos, most of the time, at Cinegear last year and et cetera, and at IBC and et cetera, when we do demos of the dailies workflow, we use Copra. I reach out to IVAR, we spin up our server if it's not already on. They've supported HDR. I don't think anybody else does so far. They're the guys that do. So all the demos that we see, if you come and buy our booths or whatever, is with Copra doing dailies, not DAX or Pix or anything like that. So I know for it's definitely fully supported as it evolves. We work really closely with them.
Yeah, so that's a web deliverable, and there's I think 2 different resolutions, and we write the files, and so I think you would target a certain directory when you render it, and then the Copra database server would pick those up.
All right. Any more questions or anything, or we're going to wrap it up after a nice little almost 3.5 hour lesson, which is good.
I think it was awesome. Thanks, Steve.
My pleasure.
Yeah, glad we finally got to do this.
Anybody that needs a little one-on-one, it justifies my existence. And I'm, you know, if you've got one of these Macs and you want to play with it, I will give out a 1-week license like candy.
Nice.
All
Sweet.
right. Thanks, everybody.
All right,
Thanks,
guys.
Jamie.
So that's
Thanks
it.
everybody for coming.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate you guys.
All right. Yeah, I'm steve@altsystems.com if you need to reach out to me.
Thanks, Steve. Later, guys.
All right.
Thank you, guys.